wandering the streets of Chicago barefoot and screaming my name. I gripped the receiver so hard the plastic creaked and told him he was out of his damn mind because I only have one son. He didn't miss a beat. He said, "Mr. Mitchell, if you do not come down to the station to identify this woman right now, we will send a patrol car to arrest you for elder neglect and endangerment of a dependent adult." I slammed the phone down, threw my coat over my pajamas, and drove into the freezing night. I was furious. I was ready to tear that precinct apart for this mistake. But when I walked into that interrogation room and saw the woman sitting there, the rage died in my throat. It wasn't her face that stopped my heart. It was what she was clutching in her dirty, trembling hands. Before I tell you what I saw that made a 73-year-old man almost drop to his knees, tell me in the comments where you are listening from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight for the truth when the whole world called you crazy. 2:14 in the morning is not a time for good news. It is the time when the steel mills used to change shifts back when I was a foreman, and it is the time when bad habits come home to roost. When the landline rang, cutting through the silence of my empty house, my first thought was Marcus. My son Marcus has a habit of finding trouble the way a magnet finds iron. I thought maybe he had gambled away his rent money again or got into a fight at one of those dive bars he pretends he doesn't go to. I fumbled for my glasses, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and picked up the phone. I expected Marcus's voice whining and asking for a bailout. Instead, a voice as cold and metallic as a sheet of tin greeted me. "This is Officer Miller from the 4th District. Am I speaking to Cyrus Mitchell?" I sat up, the joints in my back popping. I told him, "Yes, this is Cyrus." The officer took a breath that sounded too heavy for a simple notification. "We have a female here, approximately 30 years of age, found wandering near Union Park. She is in a state of extreme distress. She has no identification on her person, but she had a piece of paper pinned to the inside of her coat, with your name, this phone number, and your address written on it. She claims to be your daughter." I let out a harsh laugh that sounded more like a bark. I told the officer he had the wrong house and the wrong man. I told him my wife Lucille passed away 5 years ago, and we only ever had one child, a son named Marcus. I told him to stop wasting my time and check his paperwork because I am a retired man who just wants to sleep. I was about to hang up. I was ready to go back to bed and forget this nonsense. But Officer Miller's voice sharpened. It lost that professional courtesy and turned into a command. "Listen to me, Mr. Mitchell. This woman knows details. She knows the layout of your house. She knows about the cherry tree in the backyard. She is hysterical and she is asking for her father. If you abandon a vulnerable adult who is clearly under your care, I will have a squad car at your door in 10 minutes. Do you want to explain to your neighbors why you are being hauled out in handcuffs at 2 in the morning? The threat hung in the air. I looked around my bedroom. It was quiet, orderly, just the way I kept it since Lucille died. I worked 40 years in the mills. I saved every dime. I own this house. I own 2 plots of land in Georgia, and I own my dignity. I was not going to let some clerical error or some con artist drag my name through the mud. I told the officer I was coming down. Not to claim her, but to look him in the eye and tell him he was an idiot. I got dressed in the dark. My hands were shaking not from fear but from anger. This felt like a setup. Maybe Marcus was involved. Maybe he owed money to the wrong people, and they were using this to squeeze me. That boy has been soft his whole life. He married Brittany, a woman with a smile like a shark, and eyes that calculate the price of everything she looks at. If this was one of their schemes to get early access to my estate, I was going to cut them off for good. I grabbed my cane, not because I needed it to walk, but because it made me feel armed. The drive to the station was a blur of streetlights and potholes. Chicago at night looks different when you are angry. It looks like a beast waiting to swallow you whole. I parked my Buick under the flickering yellow light of the precinct lot. I marched inside, ignoring the pain in my bad knee. The station smelled of stale coffee floor wax and misery. It was a smell I knew well from the times I had to bail Marcus out of drunk tanks in his 20s. Officer Miller was waiting for me. He was younger than I expected, with a face that looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He didn't offer to shake my hand. He just motioned toward the hallway. I told him again firmly that this was a waste of taxpayer money. I told him I have my son's birth certificate in my safe, and I can prove I have no daughter. He didn't argue. He just stopped in front of a door with a small reinforced window. He said, "She has been asking for you by name, Cyrus." "Not Dad. Cyrus. He said she is terrified of everyone else, but she says you will know who she is." I stepped forward and looked through the glass. The room was gray and cold. Sitting at a metal table was a woman. She looked rough. Her hair was matted. Her clothes were too big for her thin frame, and she was rocking back and forth in the chair. I studied her face. I searched for a resemblance. I looked for my nose or Lucille's eyes or anything that would spark a memory. Nothing. She was a stranger. A complete stranger. I felt a surge of relief mixed with vindication. I turned to Miller to tell him I told you so. But then the woman shifted. She turned her body toward the mirror, and for the first time I saw what she was holding in her lap. My breath caught in my throat. My blood turned to ice water. Clutched in her hands, pressed tight against her chest, was a doll. It wasn't just any doll. It was a porcelain doll with a blue velvet dress and a small crack on the left cheek. I bought that doll for Lucille for our 30th anniversary. Lucille loved that doll. She kept it on the vanity in our bedroom. It was the only thing that went missing the day Lucille died in the hospital. We thought the paramedics knocked it over or it got lost in the chaos of the funeral. I stared at the doll. I stared at the crack on the cheek. I knew that crack. I made that crack when I accidentally knocked it off the dresser in 1998. There was no way this stranger could have that doll. Unless she had been in my house. Unless she had been watching us. Or unless something far more sinister was happening. I pushed past Officer Miller and shoved the door open. The woman looked up. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying mix of recognition and fear. She didn't scream. She didn't ask for money. She just held the doll out to me, her voice trembling so low I could barely hear it. She said, "Daddy, you promised you wouldn't let them take me again." I stood there, a 73-year-old man who has faced molten steel and union strikes, and I felt the room spin. I looked at the doll. I looked at her. And then I looked at the officer who was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. I realized then that this wasn't a mistake. This was a trap. And I had just walked right into the center of it. I reached out to touch the doll to see if it was real, but before my fingers could graze the velvet, the station doors burst open behind us. A familiar voice echoed down the hallway, loud and performative. "Oh, thank God you found her." My son Marcus came running down the hall with Brittany trailing behind him. Brittany was crying, but her face was perfectly made up, not a smudge of mascara out of place. She rushed past me, ignoring my shock, and threw her arms around the strange woman. She looked at the officer and then at me, her eyes gleaming with a twisted sort of triumph. She said, "Oh, Dad, stop pretending. We know you've been hiding her. We know everything." I looked at my son. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was looking at the floor, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I looked at Brittany, who was now stroking the stranger's hair like a pet. And I looked at the woman who was burying her face in the doll that belonged to my dead wife. The trap didn't just snap shut. It locked. And I knew in that cold, fluorescent-lit room that the war for my life had just begun. Officer Miller placed a single sheet of paper on the metal table between us. The sound it made was soft, barely a whisper against the cold steel, but to me it sounded like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. I looked at the document. It was a photocopy of a birth certificate, grainy and gray, but the typed letters were black and sharp enough to slice through my composure. State of Illinois. Date of birth, November 12, 1994. Father's name, Cyrus Anthony Mitchell. Mother's name, unknown. I stared at that name. My name. Including the middle name I rarely used. The room suddenly felt very small, the air too thick to breathe. November 94. I did the math in my head, counting backward through the decades past, the funeral, past the retirement party, past the years of double shifts at the mill. 94. That was the year the union sent me to Gary, Indiana for 6 weeks to oversee the blast furnace retrofitting. I was 43 then. Lucille and I were going through a rough patch. I was drinking more than I should have, trying to wash the taste of coal dust and disappointment out of my throat every night. I remembered the motel bars. I remembered the lonely nights. I remembered waking up with headaches that split my skull, but I did not remember a woman. Or maybe I did. There were faces in the fog of those years, blurry and indistinct. Could one of them have been real? Could one of them have resulted in this broken woman sitting across from me? For the first time since I walked into the station, my foundation cracked. Doubt is a dangerous thing. It is like rust on a support beam. You don't see it eating away at the metal until the whole structure collapses. I looked at the woman again. She was still clutching Lucille's doll, humming a tune I couldn't recognize. Was it possible? Did I have a child out there in the cold all these years while I was raising Marcus in warmth and comfort? The guilt hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. If this was true, I was a monster. If this was true, I deserved every bit of the judgment in Officer Miller's eyes. But then I looked at the mother line again, unknown. How could a mother be unknown on a birth certificate unless the child was abandoned at a fire station or a hospital? And if she was abandoned, how did she know my name? How did she find me now? The logic didn't hold water, but my heart was beating too fast to think clearly. Officer Miller leaned in, his voice dropping to a register that was meant to be comforting but felt condescending. Mr. Mitchell, DNA testing will take weeks. But given the circumstances, the specific knowledge she has of your home in this document, we are treating this as a verified relation. She has nowhere else to go. Social services are stretched thin. If you don't take her, she goes to a shelter. Is that what you want for your flesh and blood? Before I could answer, before I could scream that I needed a lawyer or a drink or both, the door handle turned. The heavy click of the latch echoed like a gunshot. My son Marcus walked in, followed closely by his wife Brittany. I expected shock. I expected Marcus to look at this woman and yell that it was impossible that he was an only child. I expected Brittany to demand a paternity test immediately because she guarded my estate like a dragon guarding gold. I was ready to fight them to prove my innocence. But what happened next was worse than any fight. It was a performance. Marcus stopped near the door, refusing to look at me. He looked at his shoes, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket, his shoulders hunched in that posture of defeat he had perfected over 35 years. But Brittany didn't hesitate. She swept into the room with the grace of a funeral director, her face arranged in a mask of tragic sympathy. She walked right past me. She walked right past the police officer. She went straight to the woman, to Natasha. She knelt beside the chair, ignoring the filth on the woman's coat, and placed a manicured hand on her shoulder. "Oh, you poor thing," Brittany cooed, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made my teeth ache. "We got here as fast as we could. It's okay now. We're here." Then she turned to me. Her eyes were wet with tears. Real, actual tears. I have seen actresses on Broadway with less talent than my daughter-in-law. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disappointment that froze the blood in my veins. "Dad," she said, soft enough for the officer to hear but loud enough to ring in my ears. "I am so glad you finally called us. I am so glad you're finally ready to stop hiding her." I stood up my chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "What are you talking about?" I roared. "I have never seen this woman in my life." Brittany, stop this nonsense. "Marcus, tell them. Tell them I don't have a daughter." Marcus flinched at the sound of my voice. He looked up, his eyes watery and terrified, and for a second I thought he was going to tell the truth. I thought he was going to be the man I tried to raise him to be. But then his eyes darted to Brittany, and I saw the invisible leash pull tight. He swallowed hard and mumbled, "Dad, just calm down. It's okay. We can handle this." "It's not okay," I shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the officer. "This is a setup. That birth certificate is a fake. I was in Gary in '94, but I never." Brittany cut me off. She stood up and walked over to me, placing her hands on my arms. Her grip was firm, her nails digging slightly into my skin through my coat. "Dad, please," she said, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that the officer leaned in to hear. "You're getting confused again, just like last week with the car keys, just like the time you forgot you left the stove on." I pulled away from her as if she were made of fire. "I have never left the stove on in my life. I am the most careful man you know." Brittany turned to Officer Miller, shaking her head sadly. "I am so sorry, officer. My father-in-law. His memory has been slipping lately. Dr. Stevens warned us this stage was coming. He gets very defensive when he's confused." She looked back at me, her expression one of heartbreaking patience. "Dad, don't you remember? You've been sending money to her caregiver for years. Every month. You told me about it last Christmas when you had that little episode with the eggnog. You were crying. You said you regretted not bringing her home." I stared at her, my mouth open. The lie was so audacious, so detailed, that for a split second my brain tried to find the memory she was talking about. "Did I? No. I never sent money. I check my bank statements down to the penny. I know where every dollar goes." But she said it with such conviction. And the mention of Dr. Stevens, my actual general practitioner, gave the lie a weight of authority. Officer Miller looked from Brittany to me, and I saw the shift in his eyes. He no longer saw a stubborn old man defending his rights. He saw a senile old man losing his grip on reality. The narrative had changed in 10 seconds. I was no longer the victim of a fraud. I was the perpetrator of a tragedy caused by dementia. Brittany pressed her advantage. She reached into her designer purse and pulled out her phone. "Look, Dad, I know it's hard to keep track, but we found the Western Union receipts in your desk drawer when we were cleaning up last month. We didn't want to embarrass you, so we put them back. But we knew. We just wanted you to be ready to tell us." She didn't show the phone to me. She showed it to the officer. Miller nodded, his face softening into sympathy for her. I lunged forward. "Let me see that." "Show me the receipts." Brittany stepped back, hiding behind Marcus. "Dad, you're scaring everyone," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "Just let us take her home. We can figure this out at the house. We don't need to make a scene here, a scene I wanted to burn the building down." I looked at Natasha. She was watching the exchange with eyes that were too sharp, too alert for someone who was supposed to be catatonic. For a brief second, the corner of her mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile, it was a signal. She looked at Brittany, then back at the doll. They were in sync. This wasn't just a scam to get money. This was an invasion. They didn't just want my cash, they wanted to dismantle my credibility. They wanted to paint me as incompetent so they could take the wheel of my life. Officer Miller closed his notebook. "Mr. Mitchell, given your family's willingness to take custody and the medical context your daughter-in-law has provided, I am releasing the subject, Natasha, into your care. However, I am filing a report with Adult Protective Services. They will be following up to ensure your home environment is safe for both of you." Safe. My home was a fortress, and I had just handed the keys to the enemy. I looked at Brittany. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking at Officer Miller, thanking him for his patience, playing the role of the saintly caregiver. I realized then that shouting would only dig my grave deeper. If I acted crazy, I proved their point. If I fought physically, I'd end up in a cell. I had to play the long game. I had to be smarter. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I straightened my coat. I gripped my cane until my knuckles turned white. "Fine," I said, my voice low and steady. "Let's go home." Brittany smiled, but her eyes remained dead. "That's good, Dad. That's really good. We'll get Natasha set up in the guest room, or maybe Marcus's old room would be better. It has a better view of the backyard. You know where the cherry tree is?" She emphasized the words, cherry tree. The detail the police mentioned. The detail only someone who had been inside my property would know. She was telling me without saying a word that she had been planning this for a long time. She had coached this stranger. She had scripted this entire night. I walked out of the interrogation room, my leg throbbing with every step. Marcus walked beside me, smelling of fear and sweat. Brittany walked ahead, guiding the stranger, her arm protectively around the woman's shoulders. I felt like a prisoner being escorted to his execution, but as we walked through the precinct doors and into the biting Chicago wind, I made a silent vow to my dead wife. They might have the police fooled. They might have Marcus under their thumb. But they had forgotten one thing. I spent 40 years in a steel mill. I know how to handle heat, and I know that even the strongest metal breaks if you find the right pressure point. I just had to find theirs. But first I had to survive the night in a house that was no longer mine. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the sound of my life being signed away. I stood there leaning heavily on my cane, watching my son Marcus sign the custody release forms. His hand was shaking. I wanted to reach out and smack the pen from his grip to tell him to stand up straight and act like a man for once in his life, but I knew it would do no good. The system had already decided I was the villain, the senile old man rejecting his own flesh and blood, and Marcus was the hero stepping up to clean up my mess. Brittany stood behind him, her hand resting on his back, not in support but in control. She was steering him just like she steered every decision in that boy's life since the day they met. Officer Miller looked at the signature and nodded. "All right, Mr. Mitchell," he said, addressing Marcus, not me. "She is released into your custody. Social services will be by on Monday for a wellness check. Keep her calm, keep her medicated if she has a prescription, and for God's sake, keep her away from stress." He shot a glance at me when he said stress. I was the stress. I was the danger. We walked out to the parking lot in a silence that felt heavy enough to crush a car. Brittany insisted that Natasha ride with them in their SUV. I refused to get in that car. I told them I was driving my Buick alone. I needed the quiet. I needed to think. As I followed their taillights through the dark Chicago streets, my mind was racing. I wasn't thinking about the birth certificate anymore. I was thinking about the doll. I was thinking about how a stranger could walk into a police station with my dead wife's most ability treasure. When we pulled into my driveway, the house looked different. It had been my sanctuary for 40 years. I paid off the mortgage in '99. I painted the siding myself. I planted the hedges. But tonight, as the headlights swept across the front porch, it didn't look like a home. It looked like a target. I unlocked the front door, and the smell of the house hit me, lemon polish and old wood. It was the smell of peace. Or it used to be. Brittany marched in first, flipping on lights, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floors. "Come on in, sweetie," she cooed to Natasha. "Welcome home. This is where you belong." Natasha stepped over the threshold. She was still clutching that doll. She looked around, her eyes darting from the coat rack to the staircase. She didn't look like a lost soul anymore. She looked like a surveyor. She looked like someone measuring the square footage for a sale. "I'm hungry," Natasha whispered. Her voice was raspy, like she hadn't used it in a long time. Brittany immediately jumped into action. "Of course you are, Marcus. Get her bag. Dad, don't just stand there. Go sit down before you fall down. I'll make some tea and sandwiches." I didn't sit down. I walked into the kitchen. This was my domain. Since Lucille died, nobody touched this kitchen but me. I knew where every spoon was. I knew which floorboard creaked in front of the refrigerator. I watched as Brittany bustled around opening cabinets, trying to look domestic. But she didn't know where anything was. She opened 3 drawers looking for a teaspoon. She checked the pantry for tea bags when they were in the canister on the counter. But Natasha just stood there by the island. She wasn't looking at Brittany. She was looking at the coffee station. "I need sugar," Natasha said softly. Brittany sighed, opening a cabinet above the sink. "Dad, where do you keep the sugar? I swear you hide things just to annoy me." I didn't answer. I wanted to see what would happen. "I keep my sugar in an old ceramic jar that looks like a cookie jar shaped like a fat chef. But I don't keep it on the counter. I keep it on the top shelf of the corner Lazy Susan, hidden behind the boxes of oatmeal because I don't use it often, and I hate clutter. Nobody knows that. Even Marcus has to ask me every time he comes over." Before I could speak, Natasha moved. She didn't search. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the corner cabinet, spun the Lazy Susan around without looking, reached behind the oatmeal box, and pulled out the fat chef jar. The room went dead silent. Brittany froze with a mug in her hand. Marcus, who had just walked in with the luggage, stopped in the doorway. "How did you know that was there?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The air in the kitchen felt suddenly very cold, like a window had been left open in winter. "That jar has been hidden there for 5 years. Since before you were supposedly born." Natasha didn't answer. She just set the jar on the counter and opened the lid, her hand trembling slightly. She wouldn't look at me. Brittany laughed, but it was a nervous, high-pitched sound that shattered the tension like cheap glass. "Oh, Dad, stop it." She probably just guessed. Or maybe she saw you get it earlier in her memories. "It's instinct. A daughter knows her father's house." "Instinct," I snapped. "Instinct tells you to look behind a box of oatmeal on a top shelf. That's not instinct. That's surveillance. Who has been in this house?" Brittany slammed the mug down on the counter. "Enough!" she shouted. "She is traumatized. She just got out of God knows what kind of situation, and you're interrogating her over a sugar jar. This is exactly why the police didn't want you alone with her. You are paranoid. You are seeing ghosts where there are just coincidences." She turned to Natasha, her voice softening instantly. "Come on, honey, let's get you upstairs. We're going to put you in the guest room." "No," Marcus said. He spoke up for the first time. "Not the guest room. That bed is full of Dad's old files. Put her in my old room. It's ready." My stomach dropped. Marcus's old room. It was right next to mine. Since he moved out, I had kept it exactly as it was: his high school trophies, his posters, the bed where I used to read him stories. It was a part of history I wasn't ready to erase. And now this stranger, this spy, was going to sleep there. I watched them go upstairs. I heard the water running in the bathroom. I heard the murmur of their voices. I felt like a stranger in my own life. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that sugar jar. It sat there like an accusation. I needed to secure the house. I couldn't sleep knowing she was up there. I grabbed my cane and went to the back door. I have a spare key hidden for emergencies, not under the mat that's for amateurs. I keep it buried in the soil of the potted fern on the back porch, wrapped in a small plastic bag. I opened the back door and stepped into the cold night air. I dug my fingers into the dirt of the fern pot. Nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs. I dug deeper, scattering soil onto the wooden deck. The key was gone. I knew I put it there. I check it every first of the month. It was there 2 weeks ago. I stood up, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Someone had taken my key. Someone had access to my home. And that someone was currently sleeping in my son's bed. I went back inside and locked the deadbolt. I wedged a chair under the handle. I went to the front door and engaged the chain, the deadbolt, and the floor lock. I felt like a man under siege. I turned off the lights downstairs, but I didn't go to bed. I couldn't. I sat in the armchair in the living room in the dark, listening. The house makes noises at night, the settling of the wood, the hum of the refrigerator. But tonight I was listening for footsteps. Around 3 in the morning I heard it. The creak of the third step on the staircase. I know that creak. You have to step on the exact center of the board to make it sound. Someone was coming down. I gripped my cane, ready to fight, but the footsteps stopped halfway. Then I heard a whisper. It was hushed, urgent, and it carried through the ventilation vent right above my head. "You did good tonight," a voice said. It was Brittany. I recognized that sharp, controlling tone anywhere. "But keep it together. You almost blew it with the sugar." Then another voice. Lower, younger. "Natasha, I didn't know. I remembered it from the photos." "What photos?" Brittany hissed. "Stick to the script. And for God's sake, stop looking at him like that. Don't look the old man in the eye. He's sharper than he looks. If he figures this out before the court date, we are all finished. Do you understand?" "I understand," Natasha whispered. "But the doll, seeing him, it feels wrong." "Shut up," Brittany snapped. "You want the money or not? You do your job. You get your cut. Now go back to bed. And tomorrow, you need to be worse. Shake more, cry more. We need Dr. Stevens to prescribe the sedatives. Once he's medicated, he won't be able to stop us." I heard the footsteps retreat back up the stairs. I sat there in the dark, my hand gripping the cane so hard my fingers went numb. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard rage that I hadn't felt since my days on the union floor when management tried to cut our pensions. It wasn't dementia. It wasn't a long-lost daughter. It was a heist. My son's wife and a stranger were plotting to drug me, declare me incompetent, and strip mine my life's work. And my son, he was either too stupid to see it or too weak to stop it. I looked up at the ceiling towards the room where the conspirators slept. They thought I was a feeble old man. They thought they could gaslight me into an early grave. They made a mistake. They brought the enemy into my house, but they forgot one thing. This is my ground. I know where the floorboards creak. I know where the sugar is hidden. And starting tomorrow, I was going to teach them that you never ever try to steal from a man who has nothing left to lose but the truth. I slowly pulled my flip phone, the burner one I kept in my toolbox, the one Brittany didn't know about, out of my pocket. I had one call to make. It was time to wake up old Joe. The war had officially started. The morning sun didn't bring warmth. It only brought a harsh, exposing light to the battlefield that my home had become. I waited until I heard the shower running down the hall. Marcus was in there. Brittany was downstairs making coffee, the clinking of spoons against ceramic sounding like she was signaling troops. This was my window. I had to know who this woman Natasha really was, and I had to know what they had brought into my house. I moved toward the bedroom that used to belong to my son. My bad knee was stiff from a sleepless night spent in the armchair, but I forced myself to walk silently. I used the edges of the hallway runner rug to muffle the tapping of my cane. I felt ridiculous. A 73-year-old man sneaking around his own upper floor like a burglar. But desperation makes you do things that dignity usually forbids. I pushed the door open. The room smelled wrong. It used to smell of old paper and dust, the smell of Marcus's abandoned comic books and high school yearbooks. Now it smelled of cheap vanilla perfume and something else. Something stale, like fear and unwashed clothes. Natasha was downstairs with Brittany. I had maybe 5 minutes. I went straight to the duffel bag she had brought with her. It was sitting on the bed, my bed, the bed I bought for Marcus when he turned 16. I unzipped it. Inside there were a few pitiful articles of clothing. A pair of jeans that looked 2 sizes too big. a sweater with a hole in the elbow, and at the bottom, wrapped in a dirty towel, was a clear plastic bag. I opened it. I expected to find drugs, maybe heroin or meth. That would explain her erratic behavior and why Brittany could control her so easily. But what I found made my blood run cold. It wasn't street drugs. It was a pharmacy bottle. An orange cylinder with a child-proof cap. I held it up to the light. The label was fresh. The date was from yesterday. Prescribing Dr. Stevens. Patient name, Cyrus Mitchell. My name. I squinted at the drug name. Haloperidol. 5 milligrams. Take 3 times daily. I dropped the bottle on the bedsheet as if it were a live coal. I worked in a steel mill for 40 years. I've seen men get injured and put on painkillers. I've seen men lose their minds and get put on antipsychotics. I knew what haloperidol was. It is a heavy sedative used for severe schizophrenia or acute delirium. 5 milligrams 3 times a day. That dose would turn a horse into a statue. It would turn a man of my age into a drooling, shuffling vegetable. It would mimic the exact symptoms of advanced dementia. They weren't just planning to lie about my memory. They were planning to chemically erase it. They were going to drug me into incompetence so that when the social worker came on Monday, I wouldn't be able to answer questions. I would just sit there and stare at the wall while Brittany told them how sad it was that Dad had lost his mind. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my hand instinctively gripping the handle of my cane like a weapon. Brittany was standing in the doorway. She wasn't holding coffee anymore. Her arms were crossed, and that shark-like smile was gone, replaced by a look of predatory satisfaction. "Found what you were looking for, Dad?" she asked. Her voice was calm, too calm. I pointed at the bottle on the bed. "What is this, Brittany? Why do you have antipsychotic medication with my name on it? I saw Dr. Stevens 3 months ago for a checkup and I was fine. He didn't prescribe this." Brittany walked into the room. She didn't look at the bottle. She looked at me. She looked at my hand gripping the cane. She looked at the open duffel bag. Then she took a deep breath and screamed, "Marcus, help! He's got a weapon!" The scream was so loud, so piercing that I flinched. Brittany didn't stop. She backed away, knocking over a lamp on the bedside table. It crashed to the floor, shattering the bulb. "He's going through her things. He's looking for something to hurt her with. Marcus." I stood there paralyzed by the sheer audacity of it. "Brittany, stop it!" I yelled. "Tell the truth for once. Explain the pills." Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. Marcus burst into the room, a towel wrapped around his waist, water dripping from his hair. He looked wild, panicked. "What? What's happening?" Brittany ran to him, burying her face in his wet chest. He was tearing apart her room. "Marcus." I caught him digging through her bag. He was looking for, I don't know, a knife, a gun. "He's having one of his episodes. He thinks she's an assassin or something." Marcus looked at me. He looked at the shattered lamp. He looked at the open bag. "Dad," he said, his voice trembling. "What are you doing? Why are you going through her stuff?" I grabbed the bottle of pills and shoved it toward him. "Look at this, son. Read the label. It's poison. They're planning to drug me. It has my name on it, Marcus. My name." Marcus reached out and took the bottle. He squinted at it. Then he looked at Brittany. Brittany pulled away from him, wiping fake tears from her cheeks. "Doctor." Stevens called it in yesterday, Marcus, after the incident at the police station. He said Dad's paranoia is escalating rapidly. He said we needed to start him on this immediately to protect him from himself. I picked it up on the way home. I hid it in Natasha's bag because I was afraid he would flush it down the toilet if he found it. And look, I was right. He's hunting for conspiracies. I stared at her. The lie was seamless. It covered every base. It explained the pills, the name, the location. It turned my discovery into proof of her narrative. "That is a lie," I roared. "I haven't spoken to Dr. Stevens." "You forged this, Marcus. Use your head. Since when have I ever been paranoid? I managed a crew of 200 men. I managed our finances. I am the sanest person in this room." Marcus looked at the bottle, then at me. His eyes were full of pity. That look hurt more than the betrayal. "It was the look you give a sick dog before you put it down," Dad, Marcus said softly. "You just accused your daughter-in-law of forging a prescription and trying to poison you. You're standing in a guest room you broke into screaming about conspiracies. That sounds pretty paranoid to me." My heart sank. He was gone. My son was gone, swallowed whole by her manipulation. Brittany stepped forward, taking the bottle from Marcus's hand. She slipped it into her pocket. Go get dressed, Marcus, she said gently. I'll handle this. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Don't be too hard on him, Britt. He's just confused. He walked out. The moment the door closed, Brittany's demeanor changed instantly. The fear vanished. The pity vanished. She looked at me with eyes as cold as dead coins. Sit down, Cyrus, she said. I didn't sit. I stood my ground. Get out of my house. Brittany laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. We're not going anywhere, and neither are you, not unless you want to go to Shady Pines. She pulled a folded document from the back pocket of her jeans. It wasn't the prescription. It was a power of attorney form. Here's the situation, she said, smoothing the paper against her leg. You have two choices. Option A. You sign this. You give Marcus and me full control over your finances and medical decisions. We keep you here at home. You get the basement apartment. We hire a nurse. You get to see your daughter, Natasha, every day. We'll be a happy big family. She took a step closer. Or option B. I call the police right now. I show them the broken lamp. I show them this prescription from Dr. Stevens that says you are a danger to yourself and others. I tell them you attacked me while searching for a weapon. They will take you on a 5150 involuntary psychiatric hold. And from there, you go straight to a state facility, the kind where the nurses steal your teeth and the hallway smells like urine. And since you'll be declared incompetent, we get control of the assets anyway. It just takes a few months longer. She held the paper out to me, her voice dropped to a whisper. Think about your legacy, Cyrus. Do you want to be the respected patriarch who retired to his basement? Or the crazy old man who was dragged out of his house in a straitjacket? I looked at the paper. I looked at her. I realized then that I had underestimated her. She wasn't just greedy. She was efficient. She had checkmated me in my own bedroom. If I fought now, I lost everything. If I signed, I lost my freedom, but I kept my presence in the house. And as long as I was in the house, as long as I wasn't locked away in some facility, I had a chance. I took the paper. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from the effort it took not to strangle her. I need my reading glasses, I said, my voice sounding like gravel. Brittany smiled. She reached into her pocket and pulled out my glasses, the ones I thought I had lost in the car. I grabbed them for you, she said. See, I'm always looking out for you, Dad. I put the glasses on. I pretended to read the legal jargon. My mind was racing. I needed time. I needed old Joe. I needed a countermove. But right now, I needed to survive the morning. I'll sign, I said, but not on a messy bed. I'll sign at the kitchen table, like a man. Brittany's smile widened. She thought she had won. She didn't know that a man who has worked with molten steel knows that you don't strike when the metal is cold. You wait until the heat is unbearable. Lead the way, I said. As I followed her out of the room, I glanced back at the empty duffel bag. She had the pills. She had the sun. She had the house. But she didn't know one thing. She didn't know that I had seen the name on the prescription bottle's label was spelled wrong. It said Cyrus McThell. Dr. Stevens has been my doctor for 30 years. He knows how to spell my name. It was a sloppy forgery, and sloppy mistakes are how empires fall. I just needed to survive the drugs long enough to prove it. The silence in my house was not the peaceful kind anymore. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a prison block before a riot. After I signed that power of attorney, the atmosphere shifted instantly. They didn't need to pretend to be nice anymore. They just needed to manage me. The first thing to go was the landline. I picked it up on Tuesday morning to call the pharmacy, and there was no dial tone, just a dead, hollow static. When I asked Brittany about it, she didn't even look up from her iPad. She told me the lines were down due to the storm and that the technician wouldn't be out until next week. There was no storm. The sky was a bruised purple, clear and cold, but there was no storm. Then the internet went out. The Wi-Fi router, which usually blinked with green lights in the hallway, was dark. Brittany said it was a service outage. She said it with a smile that dared me to argue. She knew I couldn't fix it. She knew I couldn't call anyone to fix it. I was 73 years old, trapped in a house I built, cut off from the world by a woman who treated me like a broken appliance waiting to be hauled to the curb. Marcus was no help. He walked around the house like a ghost, avoiding my eyes. If I entered a room, he would suddenly remember he had to be somewhere else. He was drowning in his own guilt, but guilt doesn't open locked doors. And the doors were locked, not literally, but effectively. Brittany had installed a new security system, a smart alarm. She said it was to keep Natasha safe, to stop her from wandering off. But every time I went near the front door, the panel would chime and Brittany would appear from nowhere asking where I was going, reminding me that Dr. Stevens said I needed to rest. I needed to get out. Or at least I needed my voice to get out. I waited until 2 in the afternoon. That was the time Brittany usually took her business calls in the sunroom, laughing loudly about market values and closing costs. Natasha was in the living room watching cartoons with the volume turned up too high, still clutching that damn doll. I shuffled into the kitchen, making a show of being confused, muttering about fixing a loose hinge on the back door. I grabbed a screwdriver from the junk drawer. I told Marcus, who was eating a sandwich over the sink, that I was going to the garage to find a screw. He barely nodded. He didn't care. To him, I was just an old man tinkering with useless things. He didn't know that the garage was the one place in this world where I was still the king. The garage was freezing. The concrete floor radiated a cold that seeped through the soles of my slippers, but the smell, oil, sawdust, and gasoline filled my lungs like oxygen. This was my sanctuary. My tools were hung on the pegboard exactly where I left them. My workbench was scarred from 40 years of projects. I didn't go for the screws. I went to the bottom shelf of my heavy metal rolling cabinet. Behind a stack of old rags and a can of solidified paint, there was a red plastic toolbox. It was covered in grease and grime, the kind of filth Brittany wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. She thought it was trash. I knew it was insurance. I popped the rusty latch. Inside, nestled in foam I had cut myself, was a Nokia brick phone from 2005. It was a prepaid burner I had kept for emergencies back when I was doing contracting work on the side. I kept it charged. I kept it loaded with minutes. It was primitive technology, no GPS, no internet, unhackable by smart home systems. I pressed the power button. The screen lit up with a dull green glow. 3 bars of signal. It was enough. My fingers, thick and scarred, fumbled a bit on the tiny rubber keys as I dialed the number. I didn't need to look it up. I had known this number for 30 years. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up, thinking maybe he was dead or in a nursing home, when a voice like gravel in a cement mixer answered. "Yeah. Make it quick." "Joe," I said. "It's Cyrus." There was a pause. A long pause. Then the sound of a lighter flicking and a deep inhale. "Cyrus Mitchell. I thought you kicked the bucket. I haven't heard from you since the Union riots in '98. I'm not dead yet, Joe. But I think I might be close." Old Joe wasn't just a drinking buddy. Back in the day, he was the best private investigator in South Chicago. He knew where the bodies were buried because he usually watched the people digging the holes. He was retired now, living on a pension and cigarettes. But a man like Joe never really stops knowing things. I told him everything. I spoke fast, my breath clouding in the cold air. I told him about the girl, the birth certificate, the fake prescription, the isolation. I told him about Brittany's sudden takeover. I didn't leave out a single detail. Joe listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, the silence on the line was heavy. "You're in a tight spot," Joe said finally. "That daughter-in-law of yours, I've heard her name before. She moves in circles that aren't exactly legal, but aren't exactly illegal either. High-risk real estate, predatory lending. She's a shark. I need you to dig Joe. I need to know who this Natasha girl is. I need to know where she came from. And I need to know if that birth certificate is real. I'll pay you. I have cash stashed in the 'your money is frozen.'" Joe cut me off. "If she has power of attorney, she's watching your accounts like a hawk. If you withdraw $5, she'll know. But don't worry about the money. You saved my ass when the foreman tried to fire me in '89. We're square. Give me 24 hours. I hung up and hid the phone back in the greasy box. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was an operator. I went back inside with a rusted screw in my hand, playing the part of the doddering old man. Brittany looked at me with disdain as I walked through the kitchen, but she didn't stop me. She thought she had won. She didn't know the cavalry was coming. The next day was an eternity. Every hour stretched out like a wire pulled to its breaking point. I sat in my chair pretending to sleep while Brittany and Marcus discussed renovating the kitchen, my kitchen, right in front of me. They talked about knocking down the wall where Lucille's favorite painting hung. They talked about selling my Buick. They talked about me as if I were already a ghost haunting the hallways. At 3 o'clock, I went back to the garage. I told them I needed to check the tire pressure on the car I wasn't allowed to drive. I retrieved the phone. 1 voicemail. I held the phone to my ear, pressing it hard against my head to hear over the thumping of my own heart. "It's Joe." Listen to me very carefully. Do not eat anything she cooks. Do not drink anything she pours." My blood ran cold. "I ran a background check on your daughter-in-law. She's leveraged up to her eyeballs, Sai. She owes money to some bad people in the garment district. She needs liquid cash and she needs it fast. But that's not the scary part." Joe took a breath, and the sound of him exhaling smoke crackled through the speaker. "I checked the insurance database. I still have a buddy in underwriting. Brittany took out a life insurance policy on you 3 weeks ago. It's a specialized high-risk policy, the kind that pays out double for accidental death in the home. Slip and fall gas leak, carbon monoxide. You get the picture." I leaned against the workbench, my legs feeling like they were made of water. She was going to kill me. It wasn't just a nursing home. It was a funeral. But Sai, there's more. And this is the part that doesn't make sense unless you look at it sideways. She didn't just insure you. She took out a policy on the girl. On Natasha. I blinked, trying to process the words. Natasha. But Natasha is her accomplice. Natasha is the one helping her steal the house. It's a smaller policy, Joe continued. But it's there, buried in a bundle deal. Why would she insure a long-lost daughter she just met? Unless the girl isn't a partner, Sai. She's a prop. A prop that can be discarded once the main asset, that's you, is liquidated. If you die, Brittany gets the house. If the girl dies shortly after, from grief or an overdose or an accident, Brittany gets a bonus. And there are no loose ends left to contest the will. I lowered the phone. I looked at the door leading back into the house. Natasha was in there. I had hated her. I had feared her. I had looked at her as a monster who invaded my life. But Joe's words turned the world upside down. She wasn't a monster, she was livestock. She was a pig being fattened for the slaughter, just like me. Brittany had brought her here to play a role, promising her money or security, but the only payment waiting for her was a shallow grave next to mine. I felt a strange twisting sensation in my gut. It was fear, yes, but it was also a grim resolve. I couldn't just save myself anymore. If I ran, if I found a way to break out and go to the cops, Brittany would panic. And a panicked shark cleans the water. She would get rid of Natasha to cover her tracks before the police ever arrived. I looked at the rusted tools on my wall. I looked at the cold concrete. I was 73 years old. My knees were bad. My heart was tired. But I was still the foreman. I was still the man who kept the line running when the heat was unbearable. I put the phone back in the box. I wiped the grease from my hands. I wasn't going to run. I was going back in there. I had to walk back into that kitchen, smile at the woman who was planning to kill me, and find a way to warn the girl who was stealing my life. I opened the door to the house. The warmth hit me, smelling of pot roast and betrayal. Brittany was humming in the kitchen. "Dinner will be ready soon, Dad." She called out, her voice cheerful and deadly. I gripped my cane. "I'm coming," I said, and I walked straight into the fire. The dining room table was set with the good china, the porcelain plates with the gold rim that Lucille used to bring out only for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Brittany had insisted on a family dinner. She said it was to celebrate my decision to sign the papers, a gesture of peace to start our new arrangement. But as I sat at the head of the table, gripping the arms of my chair, I didn't feel like a patriarch. I felt like a prisoner being offered a last meal. The chandelier above us cast a yellow, sickly light that made the shadows in the corners of the room look deep and hungry. My son Marcus sat to my right, staring into his water glass as if he could find a trapdoor at the bottom of it. Natasha sat to my left. She was wearing a dress Brittany had given her, something stiff and uncomfortable that didn't fit her frame. She looked small. She was still clutching that doll in her lap, her knuckles white against the blue velvet dress. And then there was Brittany. She was at the other end of the table, humming to herself as she carried a heavy tureen of beef stew from the kitchen. The smell of the stew filled the room. It was rich, earthy heavy on the rosemary and garlic. Any other day my stomach would have grumbled. But today, all I could hear was old Joe's voice scratching through the static of that burner phone. "Do not eat anything she cooks. Do not drink anything she pours." Brittany set the tureen down and smiled. It was a wide, toothy smile that didn't reach her eyes. She picked up the ladle. "I made your favorite, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Beef stew with extra potatoes, just the way Mom used to make it." She didn't serve family style. She ladled the stew into bowls herself at the sideboard and then brought them to the table one by one. She served Marcus first, then Natasha, And finally she brought a bowl to me. She placed it directly in front of me with a deliberate precision, centering it on the placemat. "There," she said, patting my shoulder. "Eat up. You need your strength." I looked down at the bowl. It looked exactly like the others. Thick brown gravy chunks of carrot steam rising in lazy curls, but my gut was screaming. Why did she serve me last? Why did she prepare the bowls over there instead of letting us serve ourselves? I looked at Brittany. She was already eating, taking a dainty spoonful, watching me over the rim of her spoon. "Go on, Dad," she urged. "It's getting cold." I picked up my spoon. My hand was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed to know, but I couldn't just refuse to eat. If I refused, she would know I was onto her. She would know I had spoken to someone. I had to be smarter. I had to test the waters. "I need some water," I said, my voice rough. "This water is warm." Brittany sighed, putting her spoon down. "Honestly, Dad, it's ice water. It's warm," I insisted, pushing the glass away. "Get me fresh ice." She rolled her eyes, a gesture of performative annoyance for Marcus's benefit, and stood up. "Fine, I'll get you ice." She walked into the kitchen. The moment she crossed the threshold out of sight, I moved. It was a gamble, a terrible, dangerous gamble. But I had to know if my life was truly on the line. I looked at Natasha. She was staring at the table, rocking slightly. "Natasha," I whispered sharp and low. "Look at the window. Is that a bird?" She looked up, startled, turning her head toward the dark window. In that split second, I switched our bowls. It was a smooth motion, a sleight of hand I used to use when playing cards in the break room at the mill. I pulled her bowl to me and slid mine in front of her. Brittany walked back in with the ice bucket just as I settled back into my chair. I picked up my spoon and took a bite of the stew that had been meant for Natasha. It tasted fine. Salty, savory. I watched Natasha. She hadn't noticed the switch. She picked up her spoon. She was hungry. I could see it in the way she ate, hunched over the bowl, shoveling the food in. She ate the potatoes. She drank the broth. I waited. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 10, 20. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Joe was just paranoid. Maybe I was just a crazy old man losing his mind, judging a woman who was just trying to cook dinner. I took another bite of my stew, feeling a wave of shame wash over me. I had just used a vulnerable woman as a food taster. What kind of man does that? And then the spoon clattered out of Natasha's hand. It hit the china plate with a sharp crack that silenced the room. I looked at her. She had stopped chewing. Her eyes were wide, blown open with sudden, absolute terror. Her hands flew to her throat. Natasha Marcus asked, half rising from his chair. She made a sound. A guttural, wet gurgle, and then she began to shake. It wasn't a shiver. It was a violent, seizing convulsion. Her back arched her chair, tipping backward with a crash. She hit the floor hard, her limbs thrashing against the wood, her heels drumming a frantic, terrible rhythm. White foam began to bubble at the corners of her mouth, pink with the stew she had just eaten. "Oh my God," Marcus screamed, jumping back. "What's happening to her?" I sat frozen. I stared at the empty bowl on the floor. That bowl was meant for me. That foam was supposed to be coming out of my mouth. That thrashing body was supposed to be mine. It wasn't just poison. It was a lethal dose. Brittany stood up. She didn't scream. She didn't rush to help. For 1 second, just 1 second, she looked at Natasha with an expression of pure cold annoyance, like someone had spilled red wine on a white carpet. Then she blinked and the mask slammed back into place. "Call 911, she shrieked, rushing over to Natasha but not touching her. "Marcus, call 911. She's having a seizure." I watched her. She wasn't trying to clear Natasha's airway. She wasn't checking her pulse. She was performing panic while watching the woman die. I slid out of my chair and got down on my bad knees next to Natasha. I grabbed a napkin and tried to wipe the foam from her mouth. "I'm sorry," I whispered to her, though she couldn't hear me over the sound of her own choking. "I'm so sorry." The next hour was a blur of flashing red lights and static from police radios. The paramedics loaded Natasha onto a stretcher. She was unconscious now, her skin a terrifying shade of gray. I insisted on going with them. I told them I was her father. I had to keep up the lie to stay close to the evidence. We rode in the back of the ambulance. I held her limp hand. I looked at her fingernails turning blue. This wasn't a game anymore. This was attempted murder, and I was the only witness who knew the weapon. At the hospital, they wheeled her into the trauma bay. I was left in the waiting room with Marcus and Brittany. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, giving everyone a corpse-like pallor. Marcus was pacing, running his hands through his hair. Brittany sat on a plastic chair, texting. She wasn't crying. She was typing furiously. After 40 minutes, the double doors swung open. A doctor stepped out. He was tall, with silver hair and a smile that looked like it cost more than my car. I recognized him. Not Dr. Stevens. This was Dr. Pierce. He was on the board of the country club where Brittany was trying desperately to become a member. "Family of Natasha Mitchell?" he asked. We stood up. "Is she alive?" Marcus asked. "She is stable," Dr. Pierce said, his voice smooth and professional. "We managed to pump her stomach and administer anticonvulsants. She's in a coma, but she's alive." "What happened?" I asked, stepping forward. "Was it food poisoning?" Dr. Pierce looked at me. His eyes were cold, dismissive. He looked at Brittany, gave a barely perceptible nod, and then looked back at me. "No, Mr. Mitchell, it wasn't food poisoning. We found high concentrations of haloperidol in her system, along with traces of benzodiazepines." I felt the blood drain from my face. Haloperidol, the pills Brittany had planted in my room. "That's impossible," I stammered. "She didn't take any pills. She was eating dinner." Dr. Pierce consulted his clipboard. "Well, the toxicology report is clear. She ingested a massive overdose of antipsychotic medication, the kind of medication typically prescribed for severe dementia or delirium." He paused, letting the silence stretch out. Then he looked at Brittany. "Mrs. Mitchell, does anyone in the household have a prescription for haloperidol?" Brittany let out a sob, a perfect, choked little sob. She covered her mouth with her hand. "Yes," she whispered. "My father-in-law. We just got the prescription yesterday. I told him to keep it locked up. I told him it was dangerous." She turned to me, her eyes wet with tears but hard as flint. "Dad, where did you put your pills? Did you leave them on the counter? Did you mix them into the food because you were confused? Oh God, Dad, what did you do?" The trap snapped shut. It was elegant. It was brutal. If I said I swapped the bowls, I admitted to knowing the food was tainted, which made me look guilty or insane. If I said nothing, I was the senile old man who carelessly poisoned his daughter with his own meds. "That is a lie," I shouted, my voice echoing in the waiting room. "I never took those pills. She put them in the food. She tried to poison me, and Natasha ate it by mistake." Dr. Pierce shook his head, looking at Marcus. "I'm sorry, son. This is classic projection. It's very common in advanced stages. He makes a mistake, causes harm, and then invents a paranoid narrative to shift the blame." He stepped closer to Marcus, ignoring me completely. "Listen, given the severity of this incident, poisoning a family member even accidentally, we are legally required to report this to the authorities. But since you have power of attorney, maybe we can handle this quietly. If you agree to an immediate psychiatric hold for your father, for his own safety, and for yours." Marcus looked at me. He looked at the doctor. He looked at his weeping wife. "Marcus," I said, my voice low, "look at me. Don't do this. She is lying." Marcus closed his eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I can't let you hurt anyone else." Brittany looked up from her hands. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She just watched as 2 hospital security guards walked toward me. I realized then that the soup wasn't just meant to kill me. It was a win-win scenario for her. If I died, she got the money. If I lived, I went to the asylum. I didn't fight the guards. I stood tall. I let them take my arms. As they led me away, I looked back at Brittany. I wanted her to see that I wasn't broken. I wanted her to see that she had made one critical mistake. She left Natasha alive. And as long as Natasha was breathing, the truth was still breathing. I just had to survive the psych ward long enough to let it out. They didn't take me back to my house after the 72-hour psychiatric hold. They took me straight to the Cook County Courthouse. I was wearing the same clothes I had on the night of the ambulance ride, a wrinkled button-down shirt and slacks that smelled of hospital antiseptic and stale coffee. I felt small. I felt dirty. And as I walked into that courtroom flanking a court-appointed lawyer I had met only 10 minutes prior, I realized that the system wasn't designed to find the truth. It was designed to process paperwork. And today I was just another file to be stamped and filed away in the drawer marked incompetent. The courtroom was small and windowless, lit by humming fluorescent tubes that made everyone look like ghosts. On one side of the aisle sat Brittany and Marcus. Brittany was wearing a modest navy blue dress, her hair pulled back in a severe, serious bun. She looked like a grieving daughter, a woman carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Marcus sat next to her, hunched over, staring at his hands. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. On my side, there was just me and Mr. Henderson, a public defender who looked like he hadn't slept since the Reagan administration. He smelled of cheap tobacco and resignation. He told me to keep my mouth shut and let him do the talking. I wanted to fire him. I wanted to stand up and roar like a lion, but I knew that any outburst would just be another nail in my coffin. The judge, a woman named Reynolds with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked at the file in front of her with a mixture of boredom and exhaustion. She asked for the petitioner to present their case. Brittany's lawyer stood up. He was a man named Sterling, wearing a suit that cost more than my first car. He didn't shout. He didn't point fingers. He spoke with a soft, regretful tone that was far more dangerous than any aggression. "Your Honor," he began, smoothing his tie, "we are not here to punish Mr. Mitchell. We are here to protect him. The events of the last 48 hours have made it tragically clear that Cyrus is no longer capable of managing his own affairs or his own safety." He walked over to the evidence table and picked up a report. 2 nights ago, Mr. Mitchell, in a state of confused delirium, attempted to administer medication to himself. Tragically, due to his declining cognitive state, he mixed these dangerous antipsychotics into a bowl of stew, which was then accidentally consumed by his daughter, Natasha. "We almost lost her, Your Honor. She is currently in a coma at Mercy Hospital." I gripped the edge of the table. The lie was so smooth, so polished. He made it sound like a sad accident caused by a senile old man, not a calculated murder attempt by a greedy daughter-in-law. "But that is not why we are requesting an immediate emergency conservatorship," Sterling continued, turning to look at me with pity. "The poisoning was just the climax of a long history of decline. Mr. Mitchell has been living a double life, Your Honor, a life fueled by guilt and memory loss." He pulled a thick stack of documents from his briefcase. He walked them up to the judge. I strained to see what they were. They looked like bank statements. "We have uncovered financial records going back 20 years, Sterling said. "These are wire transfers. Monthly payments of $2,000 sent to a Ms. Eleanor Davis in Gary, Indiana. That is the name of the woman Natasha claims is her mother." I froze. I have never sent a dime to anyone in Gary, Indiana. I handle my own books. I balance my checkbook down to the penny every Sunday night. The judge flipped through the pages. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, looking over her glasses at me, "do you recognize these transactions?" I stood up, my knees popping. "No, Your Honor. That is a fabrication. I have never heard of Eleanor Davis. I have never sent money to Gary. My finances are impeccable." Judge Reynolds held up a page. "Mr. Mitchell, these are transfers from your primary checking account. They are dated consecutively from 1999 to present day. The routing numbers match. The authorization codes match. Are you saying the bank is lying?" I stared at the paper from across the room. It was impossible, unless someone had access to my accounts. Unless someone had been hacking me or forging digital signatures, creating a paper trail that existed only to spring this trap. I looked at Brittany. She was dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, but behind that tissue I saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk. She hadn't just invented a daughter. She had built a 20-year history to back it up. She was smarter than I thought. She was terrifying. My lawyer, Henderson, pulled me down into my seat. "Sit down, Cyrus," he hissed. "You're making it worse." Sterling wasn't done. "Your Honor, the petitioner asserts that Mr. Mitchell has been supporting this secret family for decades, but as his dementia has progressed, he has forgotten them. When Natasha arrived seeking help, his fractured mind couldn't reconcile the past with the present. The paranoia set in. He believed she was an intruder. He tried to poison her because he forgot he was the one who invited her. We are terrified that if he is left in control of his assets, he will drain the estate, giving money to phantom enemies or worse, hurt himself." He paused for effect. "We are asking for full financial and medical conservatorship to be granted to his son, Marcus Mitchell, and his daughter-in-law, Brittany Mitchell. They only want to bring him home and care for him." Judge Reynolds looked at Marcus. "Mr. Mitchell, do you agree with this petition?" Marcus finally looked up. He looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He looked like a man who was being eaten alive from the inside out. I looked at him silently, begging him to tell the truth, to be the man I raised, to remember the fishing trips, the baseball games, the lessons about integrity. Marcus swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor," he whispered, his voice cracking. "My dad, he's not himself." I just want to keep him safe. The betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow. My own son, the boy I carried on my shoulders. He was selling me out because he was too weak to stand up to his wife. The judge nodded, making a note on her file. Based on the toxicology report from the hospital, the evidence of financial irregularity consistent with hidden dependence, and the testimony of the family, I am granting the emergency conservatorship. She banged her gavel. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small room. Mr. Mitchell, she said to me, the court finds that you currently lack the capacity to manage your financial and medical decisions. All bank accounts, real estate assets, and investment portfolios are hereby frozen and placed under the control of the conservators. You are to surrender all credit cards, checkbooks, and identification to the petitioners immediately. No, I shouted, standing up again. You can't do this. This is theft. They forged those documents. Brittany is a liar and a thief. Look at her. She's smiling. Bailiff, the judge barked. A large officer stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. Mr. Mitchell, calm down or you will be held in contempt. Sterling walked over to my table. He held out his hand. He didn't look at me with pity anymore. He looked at me like a butcher looks at a side of beef. The wallet, Mr. Mitchell, he said softly. I looked at Henderson. He just shrugged, closing his briefcase. It's a temporary order, Cyrus. We can appeal in 60 days. Just give him the wallet. 60 days. In 60 days, I would be dead. They would kill me and cash out the insurance policy old Joe told me about. I reached into my pocket. My hands were trembling with a rage so hot it felt like lava in my veins. I pulled out my worn leather wallet. It had the indentation of my badge from the mill. It had a picture of Lucille tucked in the plastic window. It was the symbol of my independence. I slammed it into Sterling's hand. Sterling opened it. He pulled out my platinum visa, my driver's license, my debit card. He handed them to Brittany. Brittany took them. She held my credit card up to the light, inspecting it like a diamond. Then she looked at me. The mask dropped completely. She smiled, a true, genuine smile of absolute victory. She mouthed 2 words to me, 2 words that chilled me to the bone. Checkmate. I stood there, stripped of my money, stripped of my name, stripped of my rights. I was no longer Cyrus Mitchell, the foreman, the homeowner, the father. I was a ward of the state, a piece of property owned by the people who wanted me dead. But as the bailiff led me out of the courtroom, guiding me not to freedom, but back to the custody of my captors, I felt something heavy in my jacket pocket. It bumped against my hip. The burner phone. They had taken my wallet. They had taken my bank accounts. But they hadn't patted me down. They didn't know about the Nokia brick hidden in the lining of my coat. I looked back at Brittany one last time. She was hugging Marcus, playing the relieved wife. She thought the game was over. She thought she had taken all my pieces off the board. But she forgot the most important rule of the steel mill. You can strip the rust, you can melt the iron, but until you pour the slag, the metal is still dangerous. I walked out of that courtroom a pauper, but I was walking out with a secret. And as long as I had a signal, and as long as old Joe was out there, I still had one move left, and I was going to make it count. The war wasn't over. It had just moved underground. The bailiff had walked me to the front steps of the courthouse and left me there. He didn't care that I had no coat, no money, and no way home. He just pointed toward the train station and went back inside to warmth and safety. I stood there on the concrete steps, the wind whipping through my thin shirt, feeling the weight of my 73 years settling in my bones like lead. I dug into my pocket and found 3 crumbled dollar bills and some loose change I had missed when I emptied my wallet. It wasn't enough for a cab. It was barely enough for a bus ticket and a cup of coffee. But I didn't buy coffee. I bought a ticket to the west side. Old Joe had done his job. He had texted me an address just before I went into the courtroom. 402 West Garfield Boulevard, apartment 3B. It was a part of the city I hadn't visited since the riots in '68, a place where hope goes to die and where the streetlights are always broken. I sat on the bus, clutching my cane, surrounded by people who looked as tired as I felt. They didn't look at me. In this city, you learn early not to look at the old man talking to himself or the guy shivering in the corner. You just look forward and pray you get to your stop. When I got off the bus, the neighborhood hit me like a physical blow. It smelled of wet cardboard exhaust fumes and desperation. The building was a crumbling brick tenement with boarded-up windows on the first floor and a front door that hung off its hinges. I walked up the steps, stepping over a pile of fast food wrappers and broken glass. I wasn't Cyrus Mitchell, the respected homeowner, anymore. I was just another ghost haunting the ruins. I walked up 3 flights of stairs. The hallway smelled of cabbage and bleach, trying to cover up the scent of mold. Apartment 3B was at the end of the hall. The door was thin plywood painted a peeling yellow. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Nothing. I looked around. The hallway was empty. I gripped the handle of my cane and jammed the rubber tip into the gap between the door and the frame near the lock. I leaned my weight into it. I used to pry open stuck furnace doors at the mill that weighed 500 pounds. A cheap landlord lock wasn't going to stop me. With a sharp crack of splintering wood, the door popped open. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, leaning a chair against it to keep it shut. The apartment was a single room smaller than my bathroom at home. It was freezing. The radiator in the corner was cold to the touch. But what struck me first wasn't the poverty. It was the clutter. The room was filled with stacks of paper, books, scripts, wigs on styrofoam heads, cheap costumes hanging on a rolling rack. I walked over to the table and picked up a script. It was highlighted in yellow and pink. A streetcar named Desire. Fences, the color purple. I looked at the walls. They were covered in headshots. Photos of Natasha smiling, serious, crying, laughing. But the name printed at the bottom wasn't Natasha Mitchell. It was Keisha Williams. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. She wasn't a grifter. She was an actress. A failed one judging by the address, but an actress nonetheless. Brittany hadn't found a long-lost relative. She had held a casting call. I moved deeper into the room. On a small table next to a mattress on the floor, there was a stack of envelopes. They were red. Final notice, past due, urgent. I picked them up. They weren't credit card bills. They were medical bills. St. Jude's Oncology Center, patient Martha Williams, treatment chemotherapy, balance due $42,000. I put the bill down. The picture was coming into focus. A dying mother, a desperate daughter, a mountain of debt. It was the perfect leverage. Brittany must have found her at a community theater or a casting agency, smelled the desperation on her, and made her an offer she couldn't refuse. Play the part, get the money, save your mother. It was cruel, it was exploitative, and it was exactly the kind of thing Brittany would call a business transaction. I sat down on the edge of the mattress. I felt tired, so incredibly tired. I looked at the nightstand. There was a spiral-bound notebook lying there next to a bottle of store-brand ibuprofen. It looked like a journal. I hesitated. I am a man who respects privacy, but I am also a man who had just lost his life to a lie. I opened the notebook. The handwriting was jagged, hurried. I flipped to the entries from 2 weeks ago, October 14th. The lady in the Benz came back today. She says she has a job for me, says I have the look. She wants me to play a character, a daughter, says it pays $50,000 cash, $50,000. That pays for Mama's next round of chemo and gets us out of this hole. I told her yes. God forgive me, I told her yes. I flipped forward. October 20th, she gave me the script. I have to learn the house layout. I have to learn the old man's habits. She says he's mean. Says he deserves it. Says he's sitting on millions and won't help his own son. I feel sick doing this, but then I hear Mama coughing in the next room and I know I have to be strong. I just have to act. It's the role of a lifetime. I kept reading. The entries got darker as the days went on. The guilt was eating her alive. And then I found the entry from 3 days ago. The ink was smudged as if she had been crying while she wrote it. November 2nd. Something is wrong. The lady Brittany, she's changing the deal. She made me sign an insurance paper today. She said it was for my protection in case the old man got violent. But I saw the way she looked at me, like I was already dead. She told me that after the court date, after the old man is put away, I need to disappear for a while. She said she's booking me a trip to Mexico. But the way she said disappear, it didn't sound like a vacation. It sounded like a threat. I'm scared. I think I made a deal with the devil. If something happens to me, whoever finds this, please tell my mama I tried. I really tried. I closed the notebook. My hands were shaking. Old Joe was right. Brittany wasn't planning to pay Natasha off and send her on her way. She was planning to cash in on 2 deaths. Mine from a broken heart or a convenient accident in the asylum, and Natasha's from a drug overdose in Mexico or a disappearance at sea. It was a clean sweep. No loose ends, no witnesses, just a grieving daughter-in-law inheriting a fortune. I stood up and shoved the notebook into the waistband of my pants. This was it. This was the smoking gun. But as I turned to leave, I saw something under the bed, a shoebox. I pulled it out. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a photograph. It was old black and white. It showed a young woman holding a baby. The woman looked tired but proud. On the back, in faded ink, it said, Martha and Keisha, 1994. I looked at the baby's face. Then I looked at the mirror on the wall. I looked at my own face, lined with age and soot. We weren't related by blood. The DNA test Brittany forged was a lie. But looking at that photo, looking at the struggle and the love in that shoebox, I felt a connection to this girl that was stronger than any lie Brittany could invent. We were both fighters. We were both trying to protect the people we loved. And we were both being hunted by the same predator. I put the photo back. I didn't take it. That belonged to her. But I took the notebook. I buttoned my coat against the cold. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for Keisha Williams. I was fighting for Martha Williams. I walked out of that apartment building and back into the cold Chicago night. I had no money. I had no car. But I had the truth in my pocket. And I knew exactly where I had to go next. I had to go back to the hospital. I had to get to Natasha Keisha before Brittany finished what she started with that bowl of stew. The wind bit at my face, but I didn't feel it. I felt the heat of the blast furnace. I felt the rhythm of the mill. I was walking into the fire, and this time I wasn't coming out until I had burned the whole corrupt structure to the ground. I gripped my cane. I checked the battery on my burner phone. 2 bars left. That was enough. It was time to make a call to the only other person in this city who hated injustice as much as I did. It was time to wake up the Union. Mercy Hospital at 2 in the morning is a place where the line between the living and the dead feels very thin. I stood outside the delivery bay watching the steam rise from the laundry vents. I had no ID. I had no money. I was legally a non-person stripped of my rights by a judge who looked at a spreadsheet and decided I was expired goods. But I knew this hospital. I knew it because 30 years ago I oversaw the installation of the structural steel for the West Wing. I knew that the service elevator near the kitchen didn't require a badge after midnight because the cafeteria staff propped the door open for smoke breaks. I waited for a young orderly to step out, lighting a cigarette with shivering hands. The moment he turned his back, I slipped inside. The hallway smelled of industrial sanitizer and cafeteria meatloaf. I moved fast, ignoring the screaming pain in my bad knee. I wasn't Cyrus Mitchell, the patient. I was Cyrus Mitchell, the foreman, inspecting a job site that had gone dangerously wrong. I found room 402. The door was cracked open. Inside, the only light came from the heart monitor, casting a green, rhythmic glow on the face of the woman who had stolen my life. Natasha, or Keisha as I now knew her, was sleeping. She looked younger without the makeup and the fake defiance. She looked like what she was, a terrified girl caught in a machine she didn't understand. I pulled the chair over to the side of the bed. It scraped against the linoleum. Her eyes flew open. She gasped, scrambling backward against the pillows, her hand instinctively reaching for the nurse call button. "Don't," I said. My voice was low, rough, like sandpaper. "You press that button, security comes. They arrest me. And then you are left all alone in this room. And guess who comes to visit you in the morning? Not me. Brittany." Her hand froze. She stared at me, her chest heaving. The fear in her eyes wasn't fake this time. It was the raw animal fear of prey, realizing the hunter is in the room. "What do you want?" she whispered. "You want to kill me? You want to finish the job?" I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "I didn't poison you, Keisha. And you know it." She flinched when I used her real name. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the spiral-bound notebook. I dropped it on the bedsheet. It landed with a heavy thud. "I went to your apartment," I said. "I met your landlord. Nice place. I saw the eviction notices. I saw the medical bills for Martha Williams. $42,000 is a lot of money to owe St. Jude's." She grabbed the notebook, pulling it to her chest like a shield. "You had no right," she hissed. "That's mine. You broke into my home." "And you broke into my life," I snapped, leaning forward. My shadow fell across her face. "You walked into my house, you ate my food, you lied to the police, and you helped that woman strip me of everything I worked 50 years to build. So don't talk to me about rights. We are way past rights. We are talking about survival." I pointed a finger at her. "You think you're a partner in this? You think Brittany is going to give you 50 grand and a plane ticket to Mexico?" She looked away. Her jaw set tight. She promised. She signed a contract. A contract? I shook my head, marveling at her naivety. You signed a death warrant. I spoke to a private investigator today. Brittany didn't just insure my life. She insured yours. Her head snapped back toward me. What? She took out a policy on you, Keisha. A rider on the main estate insurance. It pays out if you die by accidental overdose or suicide within 6 months of the policy's start date. I let the words hang there in the sterile air. I watched them sink in. I watched the realization wash over her face like cold water. Think about it. I continued, my voice relentless. Why did she insist on the sedatives? Why did she insist you take the pills? Why did she watch you eat that poison stew and do nothing until you hit the floor? She doesn't want a witness. She wants a tragedy. A double tragedy? The poor senile father kills the long-lost daughter and then dies of grief. It's a perfect story. And Brittany gets to be the sole survivor who inherits the estate, the insurance money, and the sympathy of the entire city. No, Keisha whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. No, she wouldn't. She knows about my mom. She knows I'm doing this for my mom. Does she care about your mom? I asked. Does she look like the kind of woman who cares about a dying woman in a tenement apartment? Or does she look like the kind of woman who would step over a corpse to get a better table at a restaurant? Keisha squeezed her eyes shut. She was shaking. The bravado was gone. She was just a daughter trying to save her mother, realizing she had sold her soul to the devil for a check that would never clear. She tried to kill me, Keisha sobbed. The soup, it tasted bitter. I thought it was just... I didn't know. I sat back, letting out a long breath. She tried to kill me. You just got in the way. But next time she won't miss. And there will be a next time. As long as you are alive, you are a loose end. You are the only person who knows the DNA test was fake. You are the only person who knows she coached you. Do you really think she's going to let you walk away with $50,000 and a head full of secrets? Keisha looked at me. Her eyes were red, swollen, and terrified. But underneath the terror, I saw a spark. The same spark I saw in that photo in the shoebox. The spark of a fighter. What do I do? She asked, her voice trembling. I can't go to the police. I committed fraud. I helped her. If I talk, I go to jail and my mom dies alone. I leaned in close. My bad knee was throbbing, but I didn't feel it. This was the deal. This was the moment the metal was poured. You don't go to the police, I said. Not yet. You go back to the house. She stared at me like I was insane. Go back to her. She'll kill me. Not if we change the script, I said. Listen to me. Right now, Brittany thinks she won. She thinks I'm locked up in a psych ward or helpless on the street. She thinks you are a stupid, greedy girl who got lucky surviving the overdose. She is arrogant, and arrogance is blind. I reached out and took her hand. It was cold, but I held it firm. My hand was rough, calloused from steel and hard work. Her hand was soft, shaking. We are going to form a union, Keisha. Just you and me. You are going to go back there and play the part of the traumatized, obedient daughter. You are going to apologize to her. You are going to tell her you'll do whatever she says. You make her feel safe. You make her feel like she is the queen of the castle. And then she asked, and then I said, a grim smile touching my lips, you are going to be my eyes and ears. You are going to find where she keeps the real files. You are going to find the digital trail of the money she's stealing. And most importantly, you are going to help me get back into that house. How you're banned. The court took your keys. I tapped the side of my head. I built that house. I know ways in that aren't on the blueprints, but I need someone on the inside to disable the alarm. I need someone to open the gate. Keisha looked at the notebook on the bed. She looked at the door. She took a deep breath, and I saw her spine straighten. She wasn't doing this for me. She was doing it for Martha, and that was good. A mercenary is loyal to the money, but a daughter is loyal to the blood. I'll do it, she whispered, but you have to promise me something. Anything. When this is over, when she goes down, you help me pay my mom's bills. I don't want the $50,000, I just want the treatment. I looked at this girl, a con artist, an intruder, a victim. Kid, I said, if we pull this off, I'll drive your mother to chemo myself in my Buick, and I'll pay the bill in cash. She nodded. It was a deal. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, purposeful clicks of high heels. I knew that sound. It was the sound of ownership. She's coming. Keisha hissed, her eyes widening. Brittany. She comes every morning at 3 a.m. to check on me, to make sure I haven't talked to the doctors. I stood up. I couldn't be found here. If she saw me, the game was over before it started, Hyde Keisha whispered, pointing to the small bathroom. I limped into the dark bathroom and pulled the door almost shut, leaving a crack just wide enough to see. I held my breath. The door to the hospital room swung open. Brittany walked in. She looked immaculate even at this hour. She was wearing a trench coat and sunglasses like a movie star avoiding the paparazzi. She walked straight to the bed. She didn't ask how Keisha was feeling. She didn't check the chart. She leaned over the bed, her face inches from Keisha's. "You're awake," Brittany said. Her voice wasn't sweet anymore. It was cold, flat, and terrifying. "Yes," Keisha whispered. "Good," Brittany said. "I spoke to the lawyers. The old man is out on the street. The house is ours. But you are becoming a liability, darling. This little stunt with the soup, very dramatic, but expensive. I didn't mean to," Keisha stammered, sticking to the plan. "I was just hungry." Brittany reached out and smoothed Keisha's hair. It looked like a mother comforting a child, but the tension in her fingers was violent. "Listen to me closely, Natasha. You get discharged tomorrow. You come back to the house, and you sign the final release forms for the insurance. After that, we'll discuss your trip to Mexico. Do not make me regret saving you from the gutter. Do you understand?" "I understand," Keisha said. "I'm sorry, Brittany. I'll be good. Good girl." Brittany straightened up. She looked around the room, her eyes scanning the shadows. For a second, her gaze lingered on the bathroom door. My heart stopped. I gripped my cane, ready to swing, but she turned away, checked her watch, and walked out. I waited until her footsteps faded down the hall. I stepped out of the bathroom. Keisha was trembling, tears streaming down her face, but she was nodding. "I believe you," she whispered. She looked at me like I was a piece of meat. I walked to the door. "Get some sleep, kid," I said. "Tomorrow the performance of your life begins. And remember, don't eat the soup." I slipped out into the hallway, moving back toward the service elevator. I had no money. I had no home to go to tonight. I would have to sleep in the bus station or under a bridge. But for the first time since this nightmare started, I didn't feel cold. I felt the fire. I had a spy behind enemy lines. The alliance was formed. The counterattack had begun. And Brittany, with all her lawyers and her schemes, had no idea that the old man she threw away was about to bring the whole steel mill down on her head. I walked back to the house the next morning, not as a conqueror, but as a ghost. The sun was barely up, casting long, gray shadows across the lawn I had mowed for 40 years. My coat was dirty from a night spent sitting on a bench at the Greyhound station, and my bad knee was screaming with every step. I looked like exactly what they wanted me to be. A broken, defeated old man who had realized he had nowhere left to go. I didn't use my key even if I had one. I knocked on the front door. A polite, hesitant knock. The knock of a beggar. It took a long time for the door to open. When it finally did, it wasn't Marcus. It was Brittany. She was wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my first year's salary at the mill, holding a cup of coffee like a scepter. She looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust. She didn't move to let me in. She just stood there, blocking the warmth of my own home, enjoying the sight of me shivering on the porch. "What do you want, Cyrus?" she asked, not even calling me Dad anymore. The judge made it clear. "You are not to harass us. Do I need to call the police again?" I hunched my shoulders, leaning heavily on my cane. I looked at the ground, refusing to meet her eyes. "No," I rasped. "No police. I'm done fighting Brittany. You win." She raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of her coffee. "I beg your pardon. I said you win," I repeated, putting a tremor in my voice that wasn't entirely fake. "I slept on a bench last night. I'm 73 years old. I can't do this. I'm cold, and I'm confused. Maybe Dr. Stevens was right. Maybe I am losing it. I just want to come inside. I'll go to the basement. I'll go to the home. I just want to speak to my son one last time before I go." Brittany hesitated. She was weighing the risk. But arrogance is a powerful drug, and she was high on it. She stepped back. 5 minutes, she said. "Then I'm calling the social worker to come pick you up." I stepped into the hallway. It was warm. It smelled of cinnamon and victory. Marcus was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the sofa, looking like a man waiting for a firing squad. When he saw me, he stood up, his face crumbling. "Dad," he choked out. I held up a hand. "It's okay, son. I understand now. You did what you had to do." I limped over to the armchair, my chair, but I didn't sit in it. I stood next to it, showing them I knew my place had changed. Natasha was there too, sitting in the corner. She looked at me, her eyes wide. She remembered our conversation in the hospital. She remained perfectly still, clutching the doll, waiting for my signal. I looked at Marcus, then at Brittany. "I need to tell you something," I said, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Before the state takes me away, before I lose my mind completely, there is something I haven't been honest about." Brittany crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe. "We know about the bank account, Cyrus. We have control of everything. There's nothing left to hide." "Not everything," I said. I looked around the room as if checking for bugs. "You know I worked at the mill for 40 years, but you don't know about the settlement." Marcus frowned. "What settlement?" "In '98, I lied, spinning the tale I had practiced all night. The asbestos lawsuit. The union settled quietly with the foreman to keep us from testifying. I got a payout, Marcus. A big one. But I couldn't put it in the bank. I couldn't let your mother know, or she would have donated it all to the church. I couldn't let the IRS know, so I put it in a blind trust, an offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands." Brittany's ears perked up. I saw the shift in her posture. The boredom vanished, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a shark sensing blood in the water. "How much?" she asked. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were glittering. I sighed, rubbing my face with my hand. "With interest, it's just over $2 million. The silence in the room was absolute. $2 million. It was enough to pay off Brittany's debts, enough to buy the country club membership, enough to fuel her greed for a lifetime. I saw Marcus's jaw drop. "Dad, why didn't you tell us?" Marcus stammered. "Because I was saving it," I said, looking at Natasha. "I was saving it for a rainy day. But now, looking at that girl, looking at my daughter, I feel so guilty. I almost killed her with that soup. I'm an old man going to a home. I don't need money. I want to make it right. I want to sign the trust over to her. To Natasha." I pointed a shaking finger at the girl. "It's her inheritance. It's the only thing I can give her to make up for the years I forgot." Brittany walked over to me. She was standing so close I could smell her perfume. It smelled like expensive flowers and rot. She put a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was gentle now. "Dad," she said softly, "that is incredibly generous of you. It's the right thing to do. We can call the lawyers today. We can add it to the conservatorship assets." I shook my head. "You can't. That's the problem. It's a blind trust, Brittany. It's not under my name directly. It's under a numerical code. The only way to access it, the only way to transfer the beneficiary, is to prove a biological link. The bylaws of the trust are ironclad. It can only be transferred to a direct blood descendant." Brittany smiled. "Well, that's easy. We have the birth certificate. We have your admission of paternity." "That won't work," I said, dropping the bait. "These are Swiss bankers. They don't care about Illinois paperwork. They require a DNA test, a fresh one, conducted by their approved medical liaison here in Chicago. They need to verify that Natasha is truly my blood before they release a single cent." I watched her face. This was the moment. She knew Natasha was a fake. She knew a real DNA test would expose the entire charade. Logic dictated she should back down. She should take the house and be happy. But greed doesn't follow logic. Greed looks at a cliff and sees a bridge. I saw the gears turning in her head. She was calculating. She was thinking about the doctor she owned. She was thinking about the bribes she could pay. She was thinking that if she could pull this off, she wouldn't just be rich. She would be wealthy. Brittany looked at Natasha. Then she looked at me. She didn't see a threat. She saw a senile old man trying to give away a fortune. She thought I was handing her the keys to the kingdom, not realizing I was handing her a loaded gun with the barrel pointed at her face. "We can do that," Brittany said. Her voice was steady, confident. "If that's what the bank needs, we will do it. Natasha is your daughter. A test will only prove what we already know." Marcus looked nervous. "Brittany, are you sure? The legal fees to access an offshore trust—" "Hush, Marcus!" Brittany snapped, not looking away from me. "This is for Natasha. It's her birthright. Dad is trying to do a good thing. Don't ruin it." She turned back to me, squeezing my shoulder. "Where do we go, Dad? Who do we call?" I pulled a crumpled piece of paper from my pocket. I had written down the number of a legitimate high-end law firm that old Joe had set up as a front. The Vanguard group, I said. Ask for Mr. Black. Tell him you want to initiate the beneficiary transfer protocol for account 704. He'll set up the testing. Brittany took the paper. She held it like a winning lottery ticket. Okay, I'll handle it. You go rest in the living room. I'll make you some tea. The transformation was instant. I wasn't a beggar anymore. I was a VIP. She needed me alive and compliant until that test was done. She bustled into the kitchen, already pulling out her phone to make the call. I sat down in the armchair. My legs were trembling, but not from age. I looked at Natasha. She was staring at me, terrified. She knew what this meant. She knew that if she took that test, she would fail. She knew Brittany would force her to cheat. Marcus sat next to me. He put his head in his hands. $2 million, Dad, he whispered. Really, I looked at my son, the boy who used to follow me around the steel mill wearing a hard hat that was too big for him. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to tell him that the money wasn't real, but the danger was. It's for the family, Marcus, I said, closing my eyes. Everything I do is for the family. In the kitchen, I heard Brittany's voice. It was loud, excited. Yes, immediate transfer. Yes, we can have the donor and the beneficiary ready tomorrow. No cost is no object. She was taking the bait. She was swallowing the hook, the line, and the sinker. She thought she was maneuvering to steal a fortune. She didn't know she was scheduling her own indictment because the banker she was calling was Old Joe, and the medical liaison who would oversee the DNA test. Well, that was going to be a surprise she never saw coming. I leaned my head back against the chair. I was back in the house. I had bought myself time. And now the real game began. I had to make sure that when Brittany tried to cheat the test, and I knew she would do it on camera, on record, and right into the hands of the law. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the snap. The clinic was located on the 4th floor of a glass building in the Loop, the kind of place where the carpet is too thick and the receptionist smiles too much. Brittany had chosen it because it looked expensive, and to her expensive meant corruptible. She sat in the waiting room tapping her heel against the floor with a rhythm that sounded like a ticking bomb. I sat opposite her, leaning on my cane, playing the part of the anxious, confused old man. Marcus was next to me, staring at a magazine he wasn't reading. And Natasha, poor Natasha, looked like she was waiting for an execution. She was pale, her hands trembling in her lap, clutching that doll so hard I thought the porcelain head might snap off. We were here for the DNA test, the golden ticket, the key that would unlock the imaginary $2 million trust fund I had invented. Brittany had spent the last 24 hours in a frenzy of preparation. She had coached Natasha on how to act. She had briefed Marcus on what to say. But most importantly, she had prepared herself to do what she did best: cheat. I watched her eyes dart around the room. She was scanning for weaknesses. She was looking for the cracks in the system. She didn't know that the system was already rigged, but not in her favor. I had spent the previous night on the burner phone with Old Joe. We knew Brittany would try to swap the samples. A woman like her doesn't leave $20 million to chance. So we had to be one step ahead. The door to the collection room opened. A nurse stepped out. She was a large woman, formidable, with arms that looked like they could wrestle a steer and a face that promised zero tolerance for nonsense. Her name tag said, Nurse Halloway. Brittany stood up immediately, flashing her brightest, most predatory smile. "Good morning," she chirped. "We have an appointment for Mitchell. Expedited processing." Nurse Halloway looked at her over the rim of her glasses. She didn't smile back. "Room B," she said, her voice flat. "All of you." We filed into the room. It was small and sterile, filled with the hum of a refrigerator and the smell of latex. There were 2 chairs set up next to a metal table covered in swabs and vials. "I'll take the father first," Nurse Halloway said, pointing a gloved finger at me. "Sit." I sat down, letting out a heavy, dramatic sigh. "Is this going to hurt?" I asked, making my voice quaver. "My gums are sensitive." "It's just a cotton swab, Mr. Mitchell," the nurse said. "Open wide." She swabbed the inside of my cheek. I watched her technique. It was professional, precise. She sealed the swab in a plastic tube and labeled it right in front of us. She placed it in a rack on the counter. "Okay," she said. "The daughter next." Natasha sat down. She looked at me, panic flaring in her eyes. She knew that her DNA would not match mine. She knew that in a few minutes the science would expose the lie and Brittany's wrath would be apocalyptic. Nurse Halloway leaned in. "Open," she commanded. Natasha opened her mouth. The nurse swabbed her cheek. She sealed the tube. She labeled it. She placed it in the rack next to mine. There, the nurse said, Standard procedure requires us to seal these in a tamper-evident bag and courier them to the lab immediately. This was the moment. I saw Brittany's muscles tense. She stepped forward, placing a hand on the nurse's arm. "Excuse me, Nurse Holloway," Brittany said, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial purr. "Could we have a moment? Just the two of us?" My father-in-law is very easily agitated by medical procedures. I just need to clarify some billing details privately. Nurse Holloway looked at Brittany's hand on her arm. Then she looked at me. I gave the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod. Everyone out, Holloway barked, except her. Marcus helped me up. We walked out into the hallway. Natasha followed, looking like she was about to faint. The door clicked shut behind us. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. I knew exactly what was happening in that room. I didn't need to see it. I had written the script. Old Joe had found Nurse Holloway 3 years ago when she was fired from a city hospital for whistleblowing on insurance fraud. She wasn't corrupt. She was angry. She hated people like Brittany. But today she was playing the role of a corruptible employee perfectly. Inside that room, Brittany was currently opening her designer purse. She was pulling out an envelope thick with cash. $5,000, maybe 10. She was sliding it across the metal table. She was producing a third vial, a vial containing a swab she had taken from me earlier, or maybe from Marcus, or maybe she had simply bought a clean DNA kit and swabbed herself to ensure a familial match. She was asking the nurse to switch the labels, to throw Natasha's sample in the trash and replace it with the one that guaranteed a payout. And Nurse Holloway, she was taking the money. She was making the switch. She was letting Brittany believe she had bought the system. But what Brittany didn't know was that the room was wired. There was a camera in the smoke detector and a microphone taped under the metal table. Every word, every rustle of cash, every request to falsify federal medical records was being recorded. By swapping those samples, Brittany wasn't just cheating a test. She was committing wire fraud. She was tampering with evidence related to an international financial trust. She was crossing the line from a civil dispute into a federal felony. I wanted her to swap them. I needed her to swap them. If she played fair, I could only get my house back. If she committed a crime, I could send her to prison for 20 years. 10 minutes later, the door opened. Brittany walked out. She wasn't smiling, but her shoulders were relaxed. She looked like a cat that had just eaten the canary and wiped the feathers off its face. "All sorted," she said, breezing past us. "They said we should have the results by tomorrow morning. I paid for the rush fee." I looked at Nurse Holloway. She stood in the doorway, her face impassive, but as her eyes met mine, she gave a single slow blink. The trap was set. The evidence was secured. The next morning, we gathered in the lawyer's office, another front set up by Old Joe's connections. The air was thick with tension. Marcus was sweating through his shirt. Natasha was staring at her shoes. I sat in my wheelchair, clutching my cane, trying to look oblivious. A man in a sharp suit walked in, holding a sealed envelope. This was Mr. Black, an actor friend of Natasha's who owed me a favor for not exposing his past. He looked the part of a high-powered attorney perfectly. "We have received the results from the independent laboratory," Mr. Black announced, his voice grave. Brittany leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrests. This was it. The moment she had paid for. Mr. Black opened the envelope. He scanned the paper. He looked up over his reading glasses. "The probability of paternity is 99.9%, he read. "It is a match. Natasha is the biological daughter of Cyrus Mitchell." Brittany let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She grabbed Marcus's hand. "Oh, thank God," she cried, turning to me with tears in her eyes. "Dad, did you hear that? She is your daughter. We knew it." I put a hand over my heart, feigning shock. "It's true," I whispered. "My little girl." I looked at Natasha. She looked sick. She knew she wasn't my daughter. She knew the test was rigged. But she had to play along. She forced a weak smile and reached for my hand. "Daddy," she said softly. I squeezed her hand. I wasn't squeezing it in celebration. I was squeezing it to tell her to hold on. The ride was about to get rougher. Brittany didn't waste a second on sentimentality. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Wonderful," she said, her voice snapping back to business. "Now that paternity is established, we can proceed with the trust transfer." Mr. Black. "How quickly can we access the funds?" Mr. Black cleared his throat. "Well, now that the beneficiary is verified, we can initiate the transfer immediately." However, since the funds are coming from the Cayman Islands, there is a standard processing period of 3 to 5 business days for the full amount to clear. Brittany's face fell. 5 days. We can't wait 5 days. We have obligations. She was thinking about the loan sharks. She was thinking about the debts she had racked up. She needed cash today. Mr. Black smiled a shark-like smile that mirrored her own. However, he said, given the certainty of the funds, our firm works with a private lending partner who can offer a bridge loan. We can advance you up to $500,000 today using the trust as collateral. The interest rate is significant, but the money would be in your account within the hour. I watched Brittany. I saw the greed battling with caution. $500,000. It was enough to pay off the sharks. It was enough to secure her position. We'll take it, she said instantly. Marcus signed the papers. Marcus hesitated. Britt, the interest rate. Maybe we should wait. Sign the papers, Marcus, she hissed. We are rich. Who cares about the interest? Marcus signed. Brittany signed. And finally Natasha signed as the beneficiary. I watched them. Brittany was practically vibrating with triumph. She thought she had just secured $500,000 of my money. She didn't realize that the private lending partner was actually a shell company funded by the Police Asset Forfeiture Division, part of a sting operation old Joe had called in a favor for. She wasn't borrowing money. She was accepting marked bills from the federal government in exchange for a fraudulent asset. She grabbed the check Mr. Black handed her. She kissed it. Come on, she said to the group. We're going to the bank. I wheeled myself after them. As we left the office, I looked back at Mr. Black. He gave me a subtle nod. The noose was tight. Brittany had just committed fraud, bribery, and money laundering in the span of 24 hours. We walked out into the sunlight. Brittany was walking on air. She was talking about buying a new Mercedes. She was talking about booking a suite at the Four Seasons. She didn't see the black sedan parked across the street. She didn't see the man in the trench coat taking photos. She turned to me beaming. You did a good thing today, Cyrus, she said, using my name with a patronizing affection. You finally made yourself useful. I looked at her. I smiled. A real smile this time. A smile that showed all my teeth. I'm just glad the truth came out, Brittany, I said. You have no idea how glad I am. She laughed, oblivious to the double meaning. She marched toward her car, waving the check like a flag of victory. I followed slowly, my cane tapping a steady rhythm on the pavement. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Her time was running out and the explosion was going to be spectacular. The ink on the DNA test results was barely dry when Brittany's phone rang. It was the ringtone she assigned to opportunity, a sharp, urgent chime that made her eyes light up like a predator spotting movement in the tall grass. I sat in my wheelchair in the corner of the lawyer's office, my hands folded over the head of my cane, watching her. To anyone else, I was just a tired old man, defeated and resigned to his fate. But inside, my heart was beating with the steady, powerful rhythm of a hydraulic press. I knew who was calling her. I knew because I had written the script. Brittany answered the phone, her voice dropping into that smooth, professional register she used when she was trying to close a deal. She listened for a moment, and then her face went pale with excitement. She looked at Marcus, mouthing the words, "It's the developer." This was the bait. Old Joe had set up a shell corporation called Golden Horizon Ventures. It had a sleek website, fake press releases, and a virtual office in a skyscraper downtown. It looked like the next big thing in Chicago real estate. And right now, the man on the other end of the line, one of Joe's old contacts from the Vice Squad playing the role of a distressed seller, was telling Brittany that a prime commercial lot in the West Loop had just fallen through escrow. He was telling her that if she could come up with $500,000 in cash by close of business today, she could secure a property worth $3 million. I watched greed wrestle with caution on her face. It was a short fight. Greed won by a knockout. She hung up the phone, her hands trembling. We have to move now, she hissed at Marcus. This is the deal of the century. If we secure this lot, we can flip it next month for a 400% profit. It's enough to pay off everything, Marcus. The house, the cars, the debts. We will be set for life. Marcus looked nervous. He wiped sweat from his forehead. But Britt, the trust money won't clear for 5 days. We don't have $500,000 liquid. We barely have $5,000 in the joint account. Brittany turned to Mr. Black, the lawyer, who was actually an actor. Is there any way to expedite the trust transfer? Can we get the funds today? Mr. Black shook his head solemnly. I am afraid not, Mrs. Mitchell. International banking laws are strict. The funds are in transit, but they are frozen until Tuesday. Brittany looked like she was going to scream. She paced the small office, her heels clicking like gunshots on the hardwood floor. She was trapped. She had the promise of millions in one hand and the opportunity of a lifetime in the other, but she couldn't bridge the gap. That is when desperation makes you stupid. And Brittany was very, very desperate. I know a guy, she said, her voice low. Marcus's eyes widened. No, Britt. Not him. Not the guy from the garment district. That interest rate is suicide. If we miss a payment, we won't miss a payment, she snapped, cutting him off. We have $2 million coming next week. We just need a bridge loan for 5 days. Who cares if the interest is 20%? We pay him back on Tuesday, keep the property, and walk away with millions. It's basic leverage, Marcus. Grow a spine. She turned to Natasha. You, get up. We have another stop to make. We drove to a part of town that didn't have glass skyscrapers or smiling receptionists. We went to a nondescript warehouse near the rail yards, the kind of place where businesses don't have signs and the windows are painted black. This was the office of a man named Sal. Sal wasn't a banker. He was a loan shark who operated under the thin veneer of a private equity lender. He didn't care about credit scores. He cared about collateral. And if you didn't pay, he didn't send collection letters. He sent guys with baseball bats. I wheeled myself into the dimly lit office following the trio. Sal sat behind a metal desk, chewing on a toothpick. He looked at Brittany, then at me, then at Natasha. You're asking for a lot of zeros on short notice, sweetheart, Sal said, his voice like grinding gears. 500 large. Cash. Today. I have the collateral, Brittany said, placing a thick stack of documents on the desk. This is the deed to the house in Hyde Park. It's fully paid off. Market value is $800,000. And this, she placed the DNA test and the trust documents on top, is proof of a $2 million inheritance clearing next week. Sal picked up the deed. He looked at it. The house belongs to a Cyrus Mitchell, he said. That's him, Brittany said, pointing at me. And this is his daughter, Natasha. She is the new beneficiary of the trust and the future owner of the estate. I have power of attorney over him, and she is willing to sign as a guarantor. Sal looked at me. Old man, do you know what she's doing? I stared blankly at the wall, letting a little drool gather at the corner of my mouth. I mumbled something about the steel mill and the price of coal. Sal snorted. He didn't care if I was senile. He only cared if the signature would hold up in court if he had to seize the house. He turned to Natasha. You the daughter? Natasha looked at me. I gave her a tiny, almost invisible blink. This was the dangerous part. If she signed, she was technically committing fraud. But we had already updated her journal to document that she was being forced to sign under duress and threat of physical harm from Brittany. It was her insurance policy. Yes, Natasha whispered. I'm the daughter. Sign here, Sal said, sliding a contract across the desk. You are putting the house up. If I don't get my money back plus 50 grand in interest by next Friday, I take the house. And if I have to chase you, well, don't make me chase you. Natasha's hand shook as she took the pen. Brittany put a hand on her shoulder, digging her fingers in. Sign it, honey. It's just for a few days. Daddy wants you to have this investment. Natasha signed, then Marcus signed, then Brittany signed. Sal opened a safe behind his desk. He pulled out stacks of cash, rubber-banded bricks of $100 bills. He counted out $500,000. He stuffed them into a duffel bag and tossed it to Marcus. Pleasure doing business, Sal said. Friday, noon. Don't be late. We walked out of the warehouse. Brittany was euphoric. She was hugging the bag of money like it was her firstborn child. She didn't waste a second. She pulled out her phone and called the number for Golden Horizon Ventures. I have the cash, she said breathlessly. I'm coming to your office now. Don't sell the lot. It's mine. We drove back downtown. The office for Golden Horizon was a temporary rental suite. A secretary, another friend of Joe's, took us into a conference room. Brittany dumped the cash on the table. She signed the purchase agreement for the phantom property. She was practically vibrating with adrenaline. She thought she was the smartest woman in Chicago. She had leveraged a senile old man's house and a fake daughter's trust fund to buy a property that would make her a queen. She didn't know that the moment she walked out of that room, the secretary would take that cash, put it in a secure bag, and hand it off to old Joe. And old Joe would deposit it into a secure account under my name, my real name, the one on my secret birth certificate that Brittany had never seen. The money had completed a circle. It went from the loan shark through Brittany's greedy hands into a fake company and right back to me. Brittany now owed a violent criminal $500,000. She had mortgaged my house to do it. But here was the kicker: the deed she used. It was a copy. The real deed was in a safety deposit box that only opened with a thumbprint. My thumbprint. When Sal tried to foreclose, he would find out the paperwork was void, and he wouldn't come after me. He would come after the woman who defrauded him. But Brittany wasn't worried about repayment. As we drove home, the high began to fade, replaced by a cold, calculating silence. She looked at me in the rearview mirror. I saw her eyes. They were dead. "We need to make sure the insurance pays out quickly," she said to Marcus, ignoring the fact that I was sitting right there. "If the trust has any delays, we need a backup plan. The life insurance policy on Dad covers accidental death. It pays out double if it happens in the home." Marcus went pale. "Britt, what are you saying? We have the money. We don't need that. We have debt." "Marcus," she snapped, "Sal isn't a bank. If the trust gets stuck in probate, Sal will kill us. We need liquidity. Dad has lived a long life. He's tired. Look at him. He's miserable." She turned around in her seat to look at me. "You're tired, aren't you, Dad? You want to be with Mom, don't you?" I looked at her. I saw the murder in her heart. She wasn't just planning to wait for nature to take its course. She was on a timeline now. Sal wanted his money by Friday. That meant I had to die before Thursday so she could file the claim. "I'm tired, Brittany," I whispered. "I'm very tired." "Good," she said, turning back to the road. "We'll make sure you get some rest. A long rest." She thought she was comforting me. She thought she was preparing me for the end. She didn't know that the $500,000 she just invested was already sitting in my new war chest. She didn't know that she had just put a price on her own head. When we got home, she poured herself a glass of wine to celebrate. She toasted to the future. "To Golden Horizon," she said, clinking her glass against Marcus's beer bottle. I sat in my corner drinking tap water. I raised my glass silently. To Golden Horizon, I thought, because the sun was about to set on Brittany Mitchell, and it was going to be a long, dark night. I checked my pocket for the burner phone. I needed to text Joe. The Eagle had landed. The money was safe. Now we just had to survive until Friday, because on Friday Sal would come calling and I intended to be the one opening the door. Friday came with a sky the color of a bruised plum and a wind that rattled the storm windows I had installed 20 years ago. Inside the house, the air was stifling thick with the scent of expensive lilies and buttercream frosting. Brittany called it a birthday party. She told the guests a hand-picked collection of her real estate cronies and a notary public she had bribed that we were celebrating my 74th year. But I knew what this was. It wasn't a celebration of life. It was a funeral with cake. It was a send-off. A final public performance to show the world how much she cared for the senile old man before she locked him away forever. I sat in my wheelchair in the center of the living room, a tartan blanket tucked over my legs to hide the fact that my knees were perfectly capable of standing. I let my head loll slightly to the left. I kept my mouth open just enough to look slack-jawed. I stared at the dust motes dancing in the light of the chandelier, focusing on them so I wouldn't have to look at the people drinking my wine and eating my food. Brittany was everywhere at once. She was wearing a red dress that was too tight and too bright, moving through the room like a flame. She touched arms, laughed too loudly, and accepted compliments on her saintly patience. "Oh, it is a labor of love," I heard her say to a man in a cheap suit who I recognized as the loan shark's lawyer masquerading as a family friend. "Dad has his good days and his bad days. We are just cherishing every moment we have left before he transitions to the facility." Transitions, that was her word for it. Not evicted, not committed, not killed. Transitioned. Marcus stood by the fireplace. He was on his third scotch and it wasn't even noon yet. He looked gray. He looked like a man who was watching a slow-motion car crash and couldn't find the brake pedal. Every time our eyes met, he flinched and looked away. He knew what was happening today. He knew that the papers sitting on the sideboard weren't just birthday cards. They were the final transfer deeds, the irrevocable trust documents, the end of Cyrus Mitchell. And then there was Natasha, my partner in crime, my spy. She sat in the corner on a folding chair, still clutching that porcelain doll. She looked terrified. Her skin was ashen and her eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal. She knew the timeline better than anyone. She knew that once those papers were signed, once Brittany had legal control of the trust fund and the house, both of our clocks started ticking. We were disposable. Brittany clapped her hands, the sound cutting through the low murmur of conversation. "Attention, everyone! Attention, please!" The room went quiet. All eyes turned to her. She walked over to my wheelchair and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was firm, her nails digging into my sweater. "We are so grateful you could all join us today," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "As you know, this has been a difficult year for Dad. His health has declined rapidly and his memory isn't what it used to be. But he has one lucid wish, one final desire to secure the future of his newfound daughter Natasha and to ensure the family legacy is protected." She gestured to the notary and the lawyer. "Today, Dad wants to sign the final authorization to transfer his assets into the family trust. It is a heavy moment, but a beautiful one." He is passing the torch. There was a polite ripple of applause. I felt a surge of bile in my throat. Passing the torch. She was stealing the fire. Brittany leaned down, her face close to mine. She smelled of wine and expensive perfume, masking the scent of rot that I knew was underneath. "Dad," she whispered loud enough for the front row to hear. "It's time. Remember what we talked about. You sign the papers and then you can go rest. You can have a nice long sleep. A nice long sleep." The threat was so thin it was transparent. She signaled to the lawyer. He brought the documents over on a clipboard. He placed them on my lap. I looked down at them. The text swam before my eyes, not because my vision was failing, but because I was forcing my eyes to unfocus. Irrevocable power of attorney, transfer of deed, release of liability. "Here is the pen, Dad," Brittany said. She pressed a heavy fountain pen into my hand. My fingers were stiff. I let the pen slip, fumbling with it. It clattered onto the floor. A few guests chuckled nervously. "Oh, poor dear," a woman in the back whispered. Brittany picked up the pen. Her smile tightened. She jammed it back into my hand, wrapping her fingers around mine to guide me. "It's okay, Dad. I'll help you. Just hold tight. Just sign right there on the line. C. Mitchell. That's all you need to do." I felt the heat of her hand. I felt the pressure she was exerting, forcing my hand toward the paper. I looked up at her. I saw the desperation in her eyes. It was Friday. Sal the loan shark was expecting his money by noon. If I didn't sign this, she couldn't show him the proof of assets. If I didn't sign this, she was a dead woman walking. I looked at Natasha. She gave me a tiny, imperceptible nod. It was the signal. The camera in her brooch was recording. The microphone in my pocket was live. Old Joe was in the van down the street. The trap was primed. I took a deep breath. I let out a low, groaning sound, the sound of a man in pain. "Water," I rasped. Brittany froze. "What water?" I said again, louder this time. "Need water." She rolled her eyes, flashing an apologetic smile to the guests. "1 second, everyone. He gets dry mouth from the medication." She turned to the side table to pour a glass of water. It took her 3 seconds. But 3 seconds was all I needed. I gripped the pen. My hand stopped shaking. My spine straightened just an inch against the back of the wheelchair. I wasn't the feeble old man anymore. I was the foreman signing a work order. I was the father correcting a mistake. I pressed the nib of the pen to the signature line. But I didn't write my name. I didn't write the shaky X she expected. In bold block letters, scratching deep into the paper, I wrote Code 704. Brittany turned back with the water. She saw me pulling the pen away. She beamed. "There," she cried triumphantly. "He did it. He signed it." She snatched the clipboard from my lap before the ink was even dry. She didn't look at it immediately. She held it up like a trophy, turning to the lawyer. "Notarize this, please. Immediately. We need to fax it to the bank." The notary stepped forward, stamp in hand. He took the clipboard from Brittany. He looked down at the document to verify the signature. His hand stopped in midair. He frowned. He adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his voice confused. What? Brittany snapped, already reaching for her champagne glass. "Just stamp it." There is no signature," the notary said. Brittany froze. The champagne glass tilted in her hand, spilling a little onto the carpet. "What do you mean I saw him write?" She grabbed the clipboard back. She looked at the line where my name was supposed to be. She stared at the words I had written. Code 704. She blinked. She shook her head as if trying to clear a hallucination. She looked at me. "What is this?" she hissed. forgetting the guests, forgetting the act. "What is code 704? I lifted my head. I didn't loll to the side anymore. I sat up straight. I brushed the crumbs from my lap. I looked her dead in the eye, and the fog in my gaze was gone. It was replaced by the cold, hard steel of a man who has nothing left to lose. I cleared my throat. My voice wasn't raspy. It was deep resonant and filled the room. "Code 704, I said, speaking clearly to the stunned room, "is the banking code for a fraudulent transfer attempt on a federal trust. It is the code that automatically freezes all assets and alerts the FBI to a crime in progress." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear the ice melting in the bucket. Brittany's face went white. Not pale, white, like a sheet of paper. What she whispered. You can speak," I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of the executioner. "I can speak, Brittany, I can see. And I can count. I counted the pills you put in my soup. I counted the money you stole from my accounts. And I counted the minutes until you walked into this trap." Marcus dropped his glass. It shattered on the hearth, the sound exploding like a bomb. "Dad," he stammered. I ignored him. I kept my eyes locked on Brittany. "You wanted a signature," I said. "You wanted access to the account. Well, you just got it. But you didn't check the bylaws of the trust, did you? Because there is no trust. There never was. Code 704 isn't a bank account. It's the police code for identity theft." Brittany took a step back. She looked at the paper. She looked at me. She looked at the guests who were now staring at her with open mouths. "He's crazy," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He's having an episode. Get the doctor. He doesn't know what he's saying." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying," I said, gripping the arms of the wheelchair and pushing myself up. A gasp went through the room as I stood. I stood on my own 2 feet. I kicked the footrests of the wheelchair away. I grabbed my cane from where it was leaning against the fireplace. "I am Cyrus Mitchell," I announced, my voice booming. "I built this house. I raised this family. And I am not going anywhere." Brittany was trembling now. The facade was crumbling. She looked at the lawyer. "Do something. He's delirious." The lawyer backed away, holding his hands up. "Lady, he wrote a code. If what he says is true, I'm not touching this." Brittany turned to Marcus. "Help me. Get him to sit down." But before Marcus could move, before Brittany could scream another lie, the front door crashed open. It wasn't the police. Not yet. It was a man in a leather jacket, a man with a scar running down his cheek. It was Sal. He stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 mountains of muscle. He looked at the party. He looked at the balloons. And then he looked at Brittany. "Noon, sweetheart," Sal said, his voice like grinding gravel. "And my app says the transfer didn't go through." Brittany looked at me. Then she looked at Sal. And in that moment she realized the true horror of her position. The police might arrest her, but Sal was here to collect. And I had just canceled her check. The silence in the room was heavier than the steel beams I used to haul in the yard. It was a physical weight pressing down on everyone's chest, sucking the air out of the lungs of the people who had come to watch an old man die. I stood there gripping my cane, not because I needed it, but because it felt good to hold a weapon. Brittany was staring at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock searching for a lie that could fix this. But there are some things you cannot lie your way out of. I reached into the inside pocket of my tweed jacket. I didn't pull out a gun. I didn't pull out a phone. I pulled out a manila envelope. It was yellowed with age, the edges frayed and soft like velvet stained with a coffee ring from a mug I set down on it 40 years ago. I tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a dull slap that sounded like a judge's gavel. "Read it," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of a foreman telling a crew that the shift was over. Brittany didn't move. She couldn't. She was paralyzed by the sudden shift in gravity. So the lawyer, the man she had hired to facilitate her theft, reached out with trembling fingers and picked it up. He opened the metal clasp. He pulled out a single sheet of paper typed on a typewriter. The ink faded to gray. "Read it out loud," I commanded. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. He cleared his throat, but his voice came out as a squeak. "It is a medical summary from Chicago General Hospital, dated March 14th, 1975. Patient Cyrus Mitchell. Diagnosis severe mumps orchitis with complications." He stopped. He looked up at me, then at the paper, then at Brittany. "Keep reading," I said. "Read the prognosis." The lawyer swallowed hard. Prognosis: permanent and total sterility. Patient is unable to father children. Sperm count is 0. Condition is irreversible. I let the words hang in the air. I watched them land on Brittany. I watched her blink once, twice as her brain tried to process the data. She looked at the paper, then she looked at Natasha, then she looked at the DNA test results she was clutching in her other hand like a lifeline. I took a step forward. My bad knee clicked, but I didn't wince. 1975 Brittany, I said softly. I was 20 years old. I spent 3 weeks in a fever dream burning up. When I woke up, the doctor told me the fever had taken my future. He told me I would never have a son. I would never have a daughter. I would never pass on my name. It broke me. It broke Lucille. We cried for a month. I turned to look at Natasha. She was sobbing silently, tears streaming down her face, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the floor, ashamed of the part she had played in this farce. So you see, I continued, turning my gaze back to Brittany. It is medically, biologically, and scientifically impossible for that woman to be my daughter. I don't care what her birth certificate says. I don't care what story she told you, and I certainly don't care about that piece of paper in your hand that says we are a 99.9% match. I pointed at the DNA test. Explain that to me, Brittany. How did you get a 99% match between a sterile man and a stranger? Did you perform a miracle, or did you commit a felony? Brittany took a step back. She hit the edge of the fireplace hearth. There was nowhere left to run. Her face was a mask of sheer terror. She realized that by producing that positive test, she hadn't proved her case. She had proved her crime. She had handed the world irrefutable evidence that she had rigged the lab results. But the room wasn't looking at Brittany. They were looking at Marcus. My son. My boy. He was standing by the window, the glass of scotch still in his hand, but he wasn't drinking it. He was staring at me with a look of absolute devastation. His face had gone the color of ash. He was shaking his head slowly over and over again. "Dad," he whispered. His voice broke. It was the sound of a child lost in the dark. "What? What are you saying?" This was the part I had dreaded. This was the part that kept me awake for 40 years. I didn't want to hurt him. I loved him more than life itself. But to save him, I had to break him. I walked over to him. I ignored the gasps of the guests. I ignored Sal standing in the doorway with his arms crossed. I only saw my son. I put my hands on his shoulders. He was taller than me now, but in that moment he looked so small. "Marcus," I said gently, "you know how you always felt different? You know how you always asked me why you were terrible at math when I was a whiz? Why you had those blue eyes when mine are brown? Why you never felt like you had the steel in your blood like I did?" Marcus trembled under my grip. He dropped the glass. It fell onto the rug with a dull thud, not breaking, just spilling amber liquid like a stain. "You always thought you were a disappointment," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You thought you were a weak version of me. You let Brittany push you around because you didn't think you deserved to lead. You thought you were failing my genetics." I gripped him tighter. "Son, you aren't failing my genetics. You aren't carrying them." I reached into my pocket again and pulled out a second photo. It was a Polaroid. It showed a young me and Lucille standing in front of a brick building with a sign that said, "St. Mary's Home for Boys." In my arms, I was holding a 2-year-old boy with scared blue eyes. 1985, I whispered. 10 years after the doctor told me I was broken. We walked into that orphanage, Marcus. We walked past 50 babies. And then we saw you. You were sitting in the corner playing with a broken truck. You looked up at me, and you didn't cry. You just held up the truck. And I knew you were mine, not because of blood, but because of soul. I shoved the photo into his hand. "We adopted you, Marcus. We chose you. Biology is an accident. Fatherhood is a choice. I chose to be your father every single day for 35 years, and I never told you because I wanted you to feel like you belonged. I wanted you to feel like a Mitchell." Marcus stared at the photo. Tears splashed onto the glossy surface. His entire life was being rewritten in seconds. The inadequacy, the fear, the desperate need to please Brittany so he could feel successful, it all crumbled. He wasn't a failed copy of Cyrus Mitchell. He was his own man, chosen and loved, who had lost his way. I looked back at Brittany. She was trembling. She knew what this meant. If Marcus was adopted and I was sterile, her entire narrative of the long-lost sister wasn't just a lie. It was a biologically impossible joke. So I said, my voice hardening as I turned on her, "If I can't have children and Marcus is adopted, who is she?" I pointed at Natasha. Brittany stammered. She must be, maybe the doctor was wrong. Maybe the vasectomy. I mean the mumps. Maybe it healed. The test says it's a match." "The test is a lie," Marcus shouted. We all turned. Marcus wasn't crying anymore. He was looking at the photo of himself as a baby. Then he looked at Brittany. The weakness was gone from his face. The hesitation was gone. For the first time in his life, he looked like me. He looked like iron. He walked over to Brittany. He snatched the DNA test from her hand. He ripped it in half. Then he ripped it again. "You lied to me," he said. His voice was quiet, deadly. "You told me she was my sister. You made me remember things that never happened. You made me question my own sanity. You drugged my father." Marcus, baby Brittany pleaded, reaching for him. "I did it for us. We needed the money. For us." Marcus laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "You did it for you. You leveraged my inheritance. You leveraged my house. And you tried to kill the man who took me in when nobody else wanted me." He turned to me. "Dad, I'm sorry." I nodded. "It's okay, son. Stand tall." I turned back to the room. The guests were silent, horrified. The notary was packing his bag, trying to sneak out the back, but the man in the doorway hadn't moved. Sal stepped forward. The floorboards groaned under his weight. He walked right past the lawyer. He walked right past Marcus. He stopped in front of Brittany. So Sal said, picking up the torn pieces of the DNA test from the floor, "Let me get this straight, sweetheart. The collateral you gave me, the trust fund, the inheritance, it's all fairy dust." Brittany backed away until she hit the wall. "Sal, please. It's a misunderstanding. The money is coming. I just need more time." Sal shook his head. He looked at me. He looked at the medical file. "Old man says he shoots blanks," Sal said. "That means the girl is a plant. That means the house deed you signed with her signature is fraud. That means you took my $500,000 and you gave me paper that isn't worth wiping my boots with." He reached out and grabbed Brittany by the wrist. He didn't pull hard. He didn't have to. The threat was in the touch. "I don't like being lied to, Brittany. I really don't like it. And my investors, they hate it," Brittany screamed. "Marcus, help me. He's going to hurt me." Marcus stood there. He looked at his wife. He looked at the woman who had isolated him, gaslighted him, and turned him against his father. He took a sip of the air, standing straighter than I had ever seen him. "He's not going to hurt you," Marcus said coldly. "He's just going to collect. And since you signed the loan in your name and you committed the fraud, I think you better go with him and explain where the money went." Brittany's eyes went wide. She looked at me. "I just tapped my cane on the floor." "Checkmate," I whispered. Sal pulled her toward the door. She was kicking and screaming, begging for the police, begging for mercy. But the guests just watched. They knew a hustle when they saw one, and they knew when a hustler got hustled. As Sal dragged her out onto the porch, I called out, "Hey, Sal?" Sal stopped. He looked back at me. "The money," I said. "The 500 grand she borrowed." "Yeah," Sal grunted. "Check the account for Golden Horizon Ventures," I said. "I think you'll find a refund was processed 5 minutes ago." "I don't want your dirty money, Sal. I just wanted her to sign her name to a felony." Sal checked his phone. He swiped the screen. He paused. Then he grinned. A gold tooth flashed in the gloom. "Payment received," Sal said. He looked at Brittany, who was now sagging in his grip, realizing that her debt was gone, but her crimes remained. "Well then," Sal said, "since the debt is paid, I guess I don't need to break legs. But the cops, I think they might want to have a chat about this wire fraud. And look who's pulling up." Blue and red lights flashed through the front window. The police. Not the ones Brittany called. The ones I called. The ones old Joe sent. Brittany slumped to the floor, sobbing. The game was over. The house was mine. My son was mine. And the truth, sharp and cold as a steel blade, had finally cut through the lies. The sound that came out of Brittany's throat wasn't a scream. It was the sound of a wild animal caught in a trap the moment it realizes chewing off its own leg won't save it. The logic in her eyes had shattered, replaced by a pure feral rage. She didn't look at the police cars flashing outside. She didn't look at Sal, the loan shark, standing like a statue by the door. She looked at me. In her twisted mind, I was the cause of this. I was the old, broken thing that was supposed to die quietly, and by refusing to die, I had ruined her life. "You old bastard!" she shrieked, her voice shredding the polite silence of the birthday party. "You ruined everything." She lunged. It happened so fast that the guests didn't even have time to gasp. She threw herself across the coffee table, scattering the medical files and the torn DNA test. Her fingers curled into claws aimed straight for my face. For a second, I thought she might actually reach me. I thought that after surviving the steel mill and the poison and the betrayal, I might go down scratching and bleeding on my own living room rug. But I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my cane, because I knew the timing. The front door didn't just open, it exploded inward. A team of officers in tactical vests swarmed the room like a black tide. They moved with a precision that made Brittany's chaotic violence look pathetic. Two of them intercepted her in midair, tackling her to the ground just inches from my wheelchair. The impact shook the floorboards. Her face was pressed into the expensive Persian rug she had bought with my stolen money. "Police. Stop resisting. Get your hands behind your back." Brittany thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. She wasn't the sophisticated real estate agent anymore. She wasn't the devoted daughter-in-law. She was exposed, raw, and ugly. I watched from my chair, my hands resting calmly on the head of my cane. I watched as they pulled her arms back and snapped the handcuffs on. The metallic click was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. It was better than the sound of a shift whistle. It was the sound of justice. Detective Reynolds, a man old Joe had briefed, personally stepped over the wreckage of the party favors. He looked down at Brittany, then pulled a folded warrant from his vest. "Brittany Mitchell," he announced, his voice booming over her sobbing. "You are under arrest for 4 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of elder abuse, forgery of federal medical documents, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent, though I highly suggest you start using it because you have done enough talking for one lifetime." "Attempted murder?" she wailed, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. "I didn't kill anyone. He's sitting right there. He's alive." Reynolds looked at me, then back at her. "Attempted murder doesn't require a body, Mrs. Mitchell. It just requires intent. And thanks to the testimony of your accomplice, Ms. Natasha Williams, and the recordings we secured from the clinic, we have enough intent to put you away until you are as old as he is." They hauled her up to her feet. She looked small now. The arrogance was gone, stripped away like paint from a rusted fender. She looked around the room, searching for an ally. She looked at the guests, but they turned their backs. She looked at Marcus, but he was staring at the floor, catatonic. And then her eyes landed on Sal. Sal hadn't moved. He was leaning against the doorframe, picking his teeth with a toothpick, watching the arrest with the casual disinterest of a man watching a traffic stop. The police ignored him. Old Joe had arranged that too. Sal wasn't the target today. He was the witness, and he was the consequence. Brittany's eyes widened with a new kind of terror. She realized that going to prison was bad, but going to prison owing money to a man like Sal was a death sentence. "Sal," she whimpered. "The deal. I can fix it. I just need time." Sal chuckled. It was a low, dry sound. He pushed off the wall and walked slowly toward her. The police officers let him pass. They knew who he was. They knew that sometimes the street creates punishments the law cannot. Sal stopped inches from her face. He smelled of cigar smoke and violence. "You don't get it, do you, sweetheart?" Sal said softly. "The police are taking you for the fraud. That's fine. You'll do 10, maybe 15 years. You'll get 3 meals a day. You'll have a roof over your head." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she and I could hear. "But you borrowed $500,000 from me. You signed the loan in your real name, Brittany, not a shell company. You. And you put up collateral that didn't belong to you. In my world, we call that theft." Brittany was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. "I'll pay you back," she cried. "I'll work in prison. Sal silenced her with a finger to his lips. "The meter is running, Brittany. Interest is compounding every day. You are going to go to prison, and you are going to sit in that cell, and every night when the lights go out, you are going to wonder, You are going to wonder if the new inmate in the bunk above you works for me. You are going to wonder if the guard bringing your food is on my payroll." He smiled, and it was the coldest thing I had ever seen. "You owe me $500,000, and I always collect. Have a nice trip." He patted her cheek, a mocking gesture of affection, and stepped back. Brittany collapsed her legs, giving out completely. The officers had to drag her out of the house. She wasn't screaming anymore. She was making a low, keen sound of absolute despair. She knew her life was over. The state would take her freedom, but the debt would take her soul. As the door closed behind her, the room fell into a stunned silence. The guests, realizing the party was truly over, began to scurry out like cockroaches when the lights come on. They muttered apologies, grabbed their coats, and fled, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. Sal looked at me. He nodded, a gesture of respect from one shark to another. "Clean play, old man," he said. "The money is back in my account. We're square." I nodded back. "Get off my property, Sal." He grinned, tipped an imaginary hat, and walked out into the twilight. And then there were three: me, Natasha, and Marcus. Natasha was still sitting in the corner clutching the doll. She looked exhausted but free. She had played her part. She had testified. She was safe. But Marcus was a ruin. He stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by the debris of the life he thought he knew. The torn DNA test lay at his feet. The photo of his adoption was still clutched in his hand, crumpled and stained with tears. He looked at the empty doorway where his wife had been dragged out. He looked at the luxury furniture she had bought, now looking like cheap props on a stage. He turned slowly to face me. He looked at my face, the face of the man who had raised him, the man he had betrayed for a woman who tried to kill me. He looked at the wheelchair I no longer needed. He looked at the cane I held like a scepter. He didn't say a word. He couldn't. The shame was too thick. It was choking him. Slowly, painfully, Marcus's knees gave way. He didn't sit. He sank. He dropped to the floor, not in a faint but in a deliberate, crushing surrender. He bowed his head until his forehead touched the Persian rug. He curled into himself, a grown man reduced to a sobbing child. "Dad," he choked out. The word was barely a whisper, broken by the heaving of his chest. "Oh God, Dad, what have I done?" I watched him. My heart ached. Every instinct in my body wanted to rush to him, to pick him up, to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he was manipulated, that she was a monster. I wanted to be the father who fixes everything. But I stayed in my chair. I gripped my cane tighter. I loved him. God knows I loved him. But forgiveness isn't cheap. You can't just hand it out like candy. If I picked him up now, he would never learn to stand. If I comforted him now, he would never understand the weight of what he almost allowed to happen. He needed to feel the coldness of the floor. He needed to feel the silence of the empty house. I let him cry. I let the sound of his grief fill the room, washing away the lies, washing away the pretense. I looked at Natasha. She stood up slowly, placing the doll gently on the table. She looked at Marcus, then at me. She understood. She walked quietly to the kitchen, leaving us alone. I waited until Marcus's sobs turned into ragged breathing. I waited until he lifted his head, his face swollen and red, his eyes begging for a mercy I wasn't ready to give yet. "Stand up, Marcus," I said. My voice was hard. Not angry, just hard. Like iron. He shook his head. I can't look at you. I almost let her. "Stand up," I barked, slamming the cane on the floor. Marcus flinched. He scrambled to his feet, swaying unsteadily. He looked at me, terrified. "You are a Mitchell," I said. "We don't crawl. We make mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But we don't crawl." I wheeled myself over to him. I stopped inches from him. I reached out and took the crumpled photo of his adoption from his hand. I smoothed it out on my knee. "You see this boy?" I asked, pointing to the toddler in the picture. I picked him because he was brave. I picked him because he didn't cry when he fell. I looked up at Marcus. "I didn't lose a son today, Marcus. I found one. But the man who stood by and watched his wife poison his father, that man needs to die. Right here, right now. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face again. "Yes, sir. I understand." "Good," I said. I turned my chair around. "Now go to the kitchen. Help Natasha make some coffee. And throw this damn cake in the trash. We have work to do." I didn't hug him. Not yet. But as I wheeled myself toward the window to watch the last police car fade into the distance, I knew we would be okay. The house was empty. The money was safe. And the rot had been cut out. It would leave a scar, sure. But steel is stronger after it's been through the fire. And we had just walked through hell and come out the other side. The police lights had faded into the distance, leaving only the red taillights of Sal's sedan disappearing down the street like the glowing eyes of a predator returning to its cave. The house was quiet. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a funeral, heavy and thick, filled with the ghosts of things that were said and things that can never be taken back. The birthday balloons Brittany had hung up were starting to droop, looking like shriveled lungs gasping for air. The cake, that expensive multi-tiered lie she had bought to celebrate my demise, sat on the sideboard untouched and mocking us. Marcus was still on the floor. He hadn't moved since Sal dragged his wife out the door. He was kneeling on the Persian rug, his expensive suit rumpled, his tie loosened, looking like a man who had been thrown from a moving vehicle. I watched him. I sat in my wheelchair, not because I couldn't stand, but because I was tired. Not physically tired. My soul was tired. I had spent 73 years building a life, forging it from steel and sweat, and in 1 week my own family had tried to sell it for scrap. Natasha, or Keisha, I should say, was in the kitchen. I could hear the faint clinking of ceramic. She was making coffee. She was cleaning up. She was doing what she had to do to survive. But Marcus was just weeping. Finally he looked up. His face was a map of ruin. His eyes were red and swollen, and for a second, just a split second, I saw the little boy I had carried out of the orphanage 35 years ago. The boy who was afraid of the dark. The boy I promised to protect. But that boy was gone. The man in front of me was a stranger. Dad, he whispered, his voice cracking. We have to do something. I looked at him, my face a mask of granite. Do something, I asked. I think we've done enough for one day, don't you? Marcus scrambled to his feet, swaying unsteadily. No, I mean for Brittany. Dad, she's going to prison. And Sal, you heard what Sal said. The debt isn't gone for her. He's going to make her life a living hell inside. She won't survive a week. She's not built for that. I stared at him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, after the poison, the lies, the theft, his first instinct was still to protect the woman who had held the knife to my throat. She made her bed, Marcus, I said coldly. Now she has to lie in it. And frankly, considering the thread count of the sheets she bought with my money, she should be comfortable. Marcus took a step toward me, his hands held out in a pleading gesture. Dad, please. You have money now. The trust. The fake trust. You have the $500,000 from Sal. You can bail her out. You can pay off the debt. We can get her a good lawyer. She's sick, Dad. She needs help, not prison. If you help her, she'll change. I know she will. I laughed. It was a harsh barking sound that hurt my chest. Change. You think a woman who watches an old man eat poison and waits for him to die is going to change? You think a woman who fakes a DNA test and mortgages a house that isn't hers is going to have a spiritual awakening? Marcus, wake up. She didn't love you. She loved the potential of my death. It's not true. Marcus shouted, tears streaming down his face again. She loves me. We're a family, and you're my father. You're supposed to help family. You always said family comes first. I gripped the handle of my cane. The wood felt warm under my palm. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike. I remembered paying for his college. I remembered bailing him out of debt 3 times before this. I did say that, I replied softly. Family comes first. But you need to understand something, Marcus. Family is a contract. It's not just blood, especially for us. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled photo of him as a baby, the one I had shown him earlier. I held it up. I chose you, Marcus. I walked into that orphanage and I picked you. I gave you my name. I gave you my home. I worked double shifts at the mill, breathing in coal dust and slag for 40 years so you could have soft hands and a college degree. I didn't ask for gratitude. I just asked for respect. I threw the photo onto the floor between us. But when you bring a wolf into the sheepfold and you watch that wolf tear your father's throat out, you aren't family anymore. You're an accomplice. Marcus went pale. Dad, don't say that. I didn't know about the poison. You didn't want to know, I roared, slamming my hand on the armrest. You saw the pills. You saw me getting weaker, You saw her isolating me. You let her treat me like a dog in my own house because it was easier than standing up to her. You are weak, Marcus, and I can forgive weakness, but I cannot forgive the man who asks me to save his executioner." Marcus fell silent. He looked at the floor at the picture of himself lying on the Persian rug. "So, what happens now?" he whispered. I pointed to the door. "You leave." Marcus blinked. "What? You leave?" I repeated. "You pack a bag, you take your clothes, you take your car, and you get out of my house." "Dad, where am I supposed to go?" "Brittany's accounts are frozen. The house is in your name." "I don't have anywhere." I shrugged. "You're 35 years old. You have a degree. You have 2 good legs. Figure it out." He stared at me, horror dawning in his eyes. "You're kicking me out." "After 35 years, just like that." "Just like that," I said. "You wanted your inheritance, Marcus. You wanted to be independent. Congratulations. You are now the most independent man in Chicago. You have nothing. No safety net, no daddy to write a check, just you and the world. Let's see how you do." He stood there for a long moment waiting for me to crack, waiting for the old Cyrus, the soft Cyrus, to come back and tell him it was just a lesson. But the soft Cyrus died when he tasted that bitter stew. The man sitting in the chair was made of the same steel that built this city. Cold, hard, unbending. Marcus turned and walked slowly toward the stairs. I listened to his footsteps. They sounded heavy, like he was carrying the weight of his entire wasted life. 10 minutes later, he came down with a duffel bag. The same bag he had packed for his honeymoon. He stopped at the door. He looked back at me one last time. "I love you, Dad," he choked out. I looked at him. I looked at the son I had raised, and I felt a terrible, crushing grief. But I didn't let it show. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said. He walked out. The door clicked shut. The sound echoed through the empty house. I was alone, or so I thought. From the kitchen, Natasha emerged. She was holding a tray with 2 mugs of coffee. She walked carefully, stepping over the debris of the party, stepping over the torn papers and the broken glass. She set the tray down on the coffee table. She didn't say a word. She just sat down in the chair opposite me, clutching her hands in her lap. I looked at her. This stranger, this con artist, this actress who had come here to rob me. "Why are you still here?" I asked, picking up a mug. The coffee was black, hot, and strong, just the way I like it. "I have nowhere to go," she said simply. "My apartment is gone. My landlord evicted me this morning. And I owe you. You don't owe me anything," I said. "You testified. You helped put Brittany away. We're square." She shook her head. "No, I owe you for my mom. You promised to help pay her bills. But I can't take your money for free. I'm not Brittany. I work for what I get." I studied her face. It was a hard face worn by poverty and struggle, but there was honesty in it. She had been willing to go to jail to save her mother. She had been willing to turn on her employer to save me. She had courage. More courage in her little finger than Marcus had in his whole body. I looked around the house. It was too big for one old man. It was full of memories and dust. I needed someone to help me manage it. I needed someone to drive me to the doctor. I needed someone to keep the silence from becoming too loud. I took a sip of the coffee. It was good. "You know how to cook?" I asked. She nodded. "Better than Brittany. And I don't use poison," I snorted. A small dry chuckle escaped my lips. "That's a low-bar, kid. I have a proposition," I said, setting the mug down. "You stay here. You take the guest room, not Marcus's room, the guest room. You help me clean this place up. You cook. You drive. You help me manage the rental properties I'm going to buy with the money I took back from Sal. And in exchange," she asked, "in exchange, I pay your mother's medical bills, directly to the hospital, every month, and I give you a salary, a fair one. You work off your debt to society, and you work off your debt to me." She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Why?" she whispered. "I lied to you. I broke into your house. Why would you trust me?" I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hands. "Because when the chips were down, you told the truth." I said, "And because you're a fighter. I like fighters." Marcus was always soft. He broke under pressure. "But you bent, but you didn't break." I pointed a finger at her. But understand this, Keisha. This isn't charity. This is a job. You lie to me once you steal one silver spoon, and I will call Detective Reynolds faster than you can blink. Do we have a deal?" She wiped her eyes and sat up straight. She looked at me with a determination that reminded me of myself 40 years ago. "We have a deal, Mr. Mitchell. Call me Cyrus," I said. Mr. Mitchell was my father, and apparently I don't have any children. She smiled then, a real smile. It transformed her face. She picked up her coffee mug and clinked it against mine. "To the Union," she said. "To the Union," I replied. We sat there in the quiet house, a sterile old man and a fake daughter bound together not by blood, but by the wreckage we had survived. Outside, the wind began to howl, signaling a storm. But inside, for the first time in a long time, the foundation felt solid. I wasn't alone. I was rebuilding, and this time I was building with steel that had been tested in the fire. I watched the steam rise from my cup, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid of the dark. I was ready for whatever came next. 6 months have passed since the flashing lights and the screaming died down on my front lawn. The seasons in Chicago have turned, shifting from the biting gray wind of that terrible winter into the humid, heavy warmth of early summer. I am sitting on my porch swing, the one I built with my own hands 30 years ago. It creaks a little when I move, a rhythmic, comforting sound that reminds me of the passage of time. I have a cup of tea in my hand. Earl Grey. Hot. Not the bitter stew they tried to feed me, and not the cheap instant coffee Brittany used to buy to save money for her designer shoes. The house is quiet now, but it is not the empty, hollow silence that terrified me before. It is a peaceful silence. The kind of silence you get after a long, hard shift at the mill when the machinery finally powers down and you can hear your own thoughts again. I had the locks changed the day after the arrest. I had the security system Brittany installed ripped out of the walls. I didn't want her cameras watching me. I didn't want her electronic voice telling me when a door was opened. I went back to brass keys and deadbolts. Simple, strong, reliable. The postman came by an hour ago. He knows me. He waved and handed me a small stack of mail, mostly bills, a few flyers for gutter cleaning, and one envelope that stood out like a fresh bruise. It was white, rectangular, and stamped with the unmistakable red ink of the Cook County Correctional Facility. The name in the return address corner was handwritten in a shaky, desperate scrawl. Inmate 8940, Marcus Mitchell. I looked at that envelope for a long time. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was inside. It would be a letter filled with apologies that didn't mean anything. It would be pages of excuses, blaming Brittany, blaming his weakness, blaming the world. He would tell me that he was suffering. He would tell me that prison is hard for a man with soft hands. He would ask for money for the commissary. He would ask me to call a lawyer to appeal his sentence. You see, Marcus didn't get to walk away. When Sal, the loan shark, realized Brittany was going down, he handed over the loan documents to the police to save his own skin. And right there next to Brittany's signature was Marcus's name. He had signed as a guarantor on a fraudulent loan. He had knowingly participated in a scheme to defraud a lender using collateral he didn't own. The judge wasn't lenient. He saw a man who had stood by while his wife abused a senior citizen. Marcus got 3 years. Brittany got 15. I stood up my knees, protesting slightly in the damp air, and walked inside to the living room. I didn't have a fire going, it was too warm for that, but I keep a box of matches on the mantel. I struck a match. The flame flared up bright and hungry. I held the corner of the envelope to the fire. I watched the paper curl and blacken. I watched the red stamp of the prison disappear into ash. I watched my son's name turn into smoke. I dropped the burning paper into the empty grate and watched it until it was nothing but gray dust. I didn't feel happy about it. A father never feels happy about erasing his child. But I felt clean. It was a necessary amputation. If you leave a gangrenous limb attached, it kills the whole body. Marcus was the gangrene. I had cut him off to survive. The front door opened, breaking my reverie. I turned around. Keisha walked in. She was wearing blue scrubs, looking tired, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was carrying a heavy backpack filled with anatomy textbooks. She wasn't playing the part of Natasha anymore. She was Keisha Williams, student, survivor, roommate. "Hey, Cyrus," she said, dropping her keys in the bowl. "I stopped by the pharmacy on the way home. Got your blood pressure meds, and I picked up those peaches you like from the market." She walked into the kitchen and started unpacking groceries. She moved with a confidence that hadn't been there 6 months ago. She wasn't tiptoeing around afraid of being caught. She lived here. She earned her keep. I walked to the kitchen doorway and watched her. We had a deal, and we stuck to it. I paid off her mother's medical debt with the first check from the refunded loan money. Her mother, Martha, was in remission now. I had driven them both to the clinic last week. Martha is a good woman. She cried when she met me, thanked me for saving her daughter from prison. I told her that her daughter saved me from a coffin. Keisha looked up and saw me watching her. She saw the soot on my fingers from the burnt letter. She paused, holding a carton of milk. "He wrote again," she asked softly. I nodded. "Did you read it?" "No," I said. "I know what it says." She didn't press. She didn't offer fake sympathy. She just nodded and put the milk in the fridge. That's what I liked about her. She understood the weight of things. She had lived a hard life, and she knew that sometimes closure isn't a hug. Sometimes closure is a locked door. "How was class?" I asked, changing the subject. "Brutal," she sighed, leaning against the counter. "We're doing pharmacology, learning about drug interactions. It's terrifying how easy it is to mess someone up if you don't know what you're doing." She paused, realizing what she said. A shadow crossed her face. She was thinking about the haloperidol. She was thinking about the soup. "I'm going to ace that test, though," she said fiercely. "I'm never going to let anyone get hurt on my watch. Not like that." I smiled. It was a genuine smile. "I believe you, kid. You've got good hands, steady hands." I walked over and picked up a peach from the bag she brought. It was ripe, soft, and smelled of summer. This was my life now. It wasn't the life I expected to have at 74. I thought I would be surrounded by grandchildren and a doting son. Instead, I was living with a former con artist who was studying to be a nurse. But looking at her, seeing the determination in her jaw and the kindness in her eyes, I realized something. I had spent 35 years trying to mold Marcus into a man of integrity, and I failed. I had spent 2 weeks fighting a war alongside this stranger, and she had shown me more loyalty than my own kin. I wasn't lonely. I was secure. I had my house. I had my dignity. And I had a legacy. It wasn't a biological legacy. It wasn't a name passed down on a birth certificate. It was this girl, this fighter who I was helping to put through school. When she became a nurse, when she saved lives, that would be my contribution to the world. That would be the steel I left behind. I walked back out to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the Chicago skyline in shades of purple and gold. I sat back down on the swing. I took a sip of my tea. It was still warm. I thought about Brittany sitting in a cell owing a debt she could never pay. I thought about Marcus staring at the walls of a prison, wondering where he went wrong. And then I looked at the cherry tree in the yard. It had lost its blossoms, but the leaves were green and strong. Its roots went deep. It had survived the winter. I took a deep breath of the evening air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like freedom. I wasn't just an old man waiting to die anymore. I was Cyrus Mitchell, foreman, survivor, and for the first time in a long time, the master of my own house. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. I spent my whole life thinking my legacy was in the son I raised, only to find my assassin sleeping in the next room. We often ignore the red flags waving in our own homes because we are blinded by the obligation of love. But remember this. The moment someone weaponizes your affection against your dignity, the contract of family is broken. It's better to be a lonely lion than a sheep led to slaughter by the shepherd you fed. Protect your peace, even if it means cutting off your own limbs. If you enjoyed this story of justice and survival, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more stories like this to light. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life to save yourself? I read every single comment. Until next time, stay strong, stay sharp, and never let anyone take what you built.